I'm Margaret Lane, 60, 4 years old, and this lavender farm is the only place I've ever truly called home. It sits on 12 acres of rocky hillside in Northern California, where the air hums with bees in summer and turns sharp with pine in winter. My late husband, Daniel, and I built it from nothing. 5 hives, 3 rows of lavender, and a stubborn dream. This morning, I stood on the porch with my hand around the rail as my son, Evan Lane, 35, hauled the last suitcase into the back of a rented SUV. His wife, Tessa, was already in the passenger seat, slipping on oversized sunglasses like she was about to board a yacht instead of leaving a dirt road. In the back seat, her mother, Veronica Hayes, adjusted a silk scarf under her chin and gave me a polite, almost perfunctory smile. The kind you'd give a stranger who opened the wrong door. "Thanks for holding things down here, Mom," Even called, shutting the trunk hard. "The hives will need checking, and the lavender's almost ready for cutting. Oh, and that irrigation timer near the lower beds. It was glitching. You know what to do." It was the way he said it, like I was hired help, not the woman who raised him on this land. I didn't answer. My mouth was dry, and I gripped the railing until the wood pressed back. "No cell service where we're going," Tessa added without looking at me. "We'll be off the grid for a while." Good for the soul. Her mother gave a little wave as the engine started, the wave of someone acknowledging a neighbor, not family. The SUV crunched down the gravel drive, dust curling in the air until their taillights disappeared behind the bend. The silence after they left felt heavy. I walked into the kitchen. On the fridge, held by a bee-shaped magnet, was a handwritten note in Evan's blocky letters. "Don't forget to water the lower lavender beds." Below it, a yellow post-it in Tessa's looping cursive, "Call the notary about the deed transfer." I stood there, staring at those words longer than I meant to. The scent of honey still lingered from last week's harvest, but it suddenly felt cloying. Too sweet, too thick, like something left out too long. The kitchen felt different without Daniel in it. He used to hum while brewing coffee, a low, tuneless sound that somehow made the mornings feel warmer. Now, the only hum came from the old fridge, and even that felt like it was straining to keep up. I poured myself a cup of tea and stepped out back, letting the steam curl into the cool air. From here, the fields rolled down in a patchwork of lavender rows, their early blooms swaying in the breeze. Beyond them, the hives stood in neat lines, each painted a different shade of blue, just as Daniel liked. Evan never cared for this life. Growing up, he'd spend more time in the house glued to the TV than out here helping us tend the bees. He said the work was too slow, too dirty. After college, he moved to the city, came back only for holidays and the occasional long weekend. Never long enough to see the lavender reach full bloom. But lately, he'd been asking more questions about the farm, about the property lines, about the deed, about what happens next. I thought it was curiosity at first. Now, I'm not so sure. Tessa had her own way of leaving fingerprints on my life, borrowing my leather, palm gardening gloves without asking, helping herself to tools from the shed, bringing them back dented muddy, or, in the case of my good pruning shears, not at all. Last month, I saw her wearing my late mother's brooch at Easter brunch. She laughed it off, said she found it in a drawer, and thought it was costume jewelry. Yesterday, as they were packing the SUV, I saw her tuck something soft into her canvas tote. The bulge at the top looked familiar, but I didn't say a word. I thought I was imagining things, until my neighbor, Alice, stopped by that afternoon with a jar of peach jam. We stood by the gate, chatting about the weather, when she said, "Evan's excited about your retirement. He told us he's planning to turn part of the field into a boutique resort." Sounds fancy. I froze with the jar halfway to the counter. "Is that so?" I asked. Alice nodded. "Said you were finally ready to hand things over." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I had never said any such thing. The next morning, the air was heavy with the kind of stillness that makes you think a storm's brewing, even when the sky's clear. I stepped into the mudroom, reaching for my good gloves. Leather palm, worn in just right, initials stitched by Daniel himself years ago. They weren't there. The peg above the workbench was empty. I checked the top shelf, the side hooks, even under the old canvas tarp where I sometimes tucked tools out of the sun. Nothing. In their place sat a pair of frayed cotton gloves. The right thumb split open so badly the stuffing poked out. It didn't take much to piece it together. Yesterday, When Tessa had carried that tote bag out to the SUV, I'd noticed the bulge at the top, the edge of something soft, familiar. She hadn't asked to borrow my gloves. She hadn't even mentioned it. For a moment, I just stood there, one hand resting on the workbench, my fingers brushing against a scatter of loose nails. The wood was cool under my palm, grounding me, keeping me from letting that small, bitter fire rise too fast. The gloves weren't worth money, but they were worth something else, something she couldn't see. Daniel had made them for me during our first summer here, when we were so broke we couldn't afford store-bought. I slid the tattered pair on anyway. The soil wouldn't care about stitching, and weeds didn't ask for embroidery. Still, as I walked toward the lower lavender beds, the torn thumb caught on the handle of the watering can, and I felt that small rip in my patience widen, just a little more. The irrigation timer was exactly as Evan had said, glitching, sputtering in uneven bursts. I knelt to adjust it, knees creaking in protest. The achy there was sharp, a reminder that bodies, like land, keep a record of everything done to them. The hiss of water steadied, and I sat back on my heels, looking across the field. From this angle, I could see the hives lined up in their neat blues, bees moving like an endless pulse between them and the lavender. Daniel used to say they were the best measure of our health here. If the bees thrived, so did we. I walked the perimeter slowly, letting my hand trail along the weathered wood of the trellis Daniel had built. Some of the ties were still the ones he'd made from old shoelaces. They fluttered in the breeze, frayed, but holding. By the time I made it back inside, the air felt different. Tense, heavy. Maybe it was just me. I poured a glass of water and noticed something on the far side of the kitchen. The drawer to Evan's old desk was open just a hair. Normally, I wouldn't touch his things. But there was a yellowed paper corner sticking out, curled as if it had been jammed in hastily. My first thought was that it was an old seed catalog. But something in me, a whisper, maybe Daniel's voice, said, "Look closer." I eased the drawer open. Inside was a crisp packet of papers, newer than anything else in there. The title across the top read Property Insurance Policy. Beneath it in clean, black print Evan Lane and Tessa Lane. No mention of me. Stapled to the front was a sticky note in Tessa's elegant script, "Needs updating after mom signs." I froze. The date was recent, 2 weeks ago. Which meant the quick meeting. With the notary last month, the one Evan had framed as a small formality for emergency access wasn't small at all. I slid the papers back exactly where I'd found them, closed the drawer without a sound, and stood in the middle of the room, my hands folded tight in front of me. The hum of the fridge seemed louder, almost mocking. Later that afternoon, Alice stopped by again with another jar of peach jam. She'd gotten into the habit of dropping things off since Daniel passed. We sat at the picnic table out back while I watered the mint bed. She was telling me about a new bakery in town when she said, offhand, "Havan mentioned he's taking over soon. Said you'd already agreed to let him handle things. Sounds like you'll finally get a break." The watering can tilted in my hand, water pooling dark in the soil. I kept my voice calm. "Is that so?" She nodded, smiling. "He said he's bringing in a design firm for the cottages. Big plans. It'll be beautiful." "I'm sure?" I smiled back, but it didn't reach my eyes. When she left, I went straight to the office. The farm's file box was heavier than I remembered. Dust had settled thick on top, undisturbed for years. Inside, every folder was labeled in Daniel's steady handwriting: deeds, water rights, suppliers. I flipped through until I found the ledger, the one we used before everything went online. Daniel never trusted banks entirely. The last entry was mine. April 12, Memorial Flowers. Paid cash. I added a new line, July 5, unauthorized expenses, resort deposit, airfare, spa. The numbers weren't the point. It was the presumption. The unspoken assumption that I would nod, smile, and let them rearrange my life while I watered their future. By nightfall, I was logged into the banking system, removing Evan's access from every account. The system warned, "This action may impact authorized users." I clicked proceed. When I stepped outside with the lantern, the night air was cool against my skin. The bees had gone quiet for the evening, but the mint by the path still carried its sharp, clean scent. Daniel planted it years ago for my headaches. He used to joke it would take over if I wasn't careful. I smiled faintly. Maybe I'd let it. Sometimes. The first betrayal you see isn't the one that cuts deepest. It's the quiet ones, soon into everyday moments, that unravel your trust thread by thread. Protecting your legacy means noticing the loose stitches before the whole fabric gives way. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge when the phone on my windowsill buzzed, rattling against the wood. I didn't need to look at the caller ID. I knew the number. Mom, something's wrong with the cards. Evan's voice came through before I could say hello. None of them are working. We can't pay for anything. The hotel bill, groceries, even the car rental. Did the bank screw something up? Behind him, I could hear Tessa's voice, sharp, frantic, something about dinner reservations and looking ridiculous. I let the kettle sit on the burner, the water just beginning to tremble but not yet whistling. I made some changes, I said quietly, silence stretched on the line. Then, more forcefully, what changes? I adjusted the accounts. Removed your access. Another pause. I could picture him looking at Tessa, both of them processing what those words meant. You can't just do that without telling me, he said, his voice lower now, edging toward anger. We had plans. I noticed. I replied. There was the sound of shuffling, maybe him pacing. Mom, this is cruel. You've always said you wanted the farm to stay in the family. I did. Until I realized family doesn't mean the same thing to all of us. I heard Tessa in the background again. Louder this time. Ask her what she expects us to do now. But I didn't give him the chance. I expect you, I said, to stop spending what isn't yours. Then I hung up. I poured the water over a sprig of mint I'd picked last night. The scent rose immediately. Clean, grounding. I took my mug to the porch and watched the sun spill over the lavender rose, painting everything in gold. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with the file box open in front of me. The ledger, the deed, the bank printouts, and, folded neatly at the top, the insurance policy with Evan and Tessa's names. I stared at it for a long while before pulling my address book from the drawer. Near the back, under V, was a name I hadn't said out loud in years: Eleanor Grant. Attorney at law. Eleanor had been a friend of Daniel's since before I came along. She was the one who helped us win the land dispute 15 years ago, the one Daniel trusted with the original deed when the county tried to rezone. When she picked up the phone, her voice was exactly the same. Steady, clipped, the kind of tone that tells you she's already 10 steps ahead. Margaret Lane. It's been a while. I need to make sure this farm stays where it belongs, I said. And not in the hands of people who see it as a bank account. Come by tomorrow morning. Bring everything. Her office was a converted carriage house behind the old library. When I stepped inside, sunlight filtered through lace curtains, catching the dust in the air like drifting pollen. Eleanor was in work boots, a mug in her hand that read "Trust me." I read the fine print. We sat at the long oak table. I laid out the documents one by one: the deed, the ledger, the policy, the bank statements. I spoke plainly. No embellishment, no bitterness in my voice. Just the truth laid bare. When I was finished, Eleanor leaned back, folding her hands. Do you want to cut him out completely? No, I said. I want to redirect. If Daniel and I built this place for anything, it was for the work. For the land. Not for it to be carved into rental cottages. We worked for nearly 3 hours, combing through every clause, every what if. By the time I signed, the papers declared the farm would go into a living trust under my sole control, and, upon my death, pass entirely to the Highridge Agricultural Fellowship, a scholarship for young sustainable farmers. Evan and Tessa's names were nowhere on it. Eleanor slid the final page toward me. This will hold, legally, financially, and morally. As I drove home, the folder sat on the passenger seat, the breeze lifting its edge. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not happy, not yet, but anchored. Sometimes, love for family can blind you to the truth of their intentions. Protecting your legacy isn't an act of spite. It's an act of stewardship. You don't owe access to what you've built to those who haven't earned the right to tend it. The next afternoon, the sky was flat and gray, the kind of light that erases shadows. I was tying soft cloth strips to a row of peach branches, propping them before the weight snapped them, when the crunch of tires on gravel pulled my head up. A rental SUV idled just beyond the east gate. Even from here, I could make out Evan in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, staring in my direction. He didn't get out. For several minutes, he just sat there. Then, without so much as a wave, he put the car in reverse and backed down the road until the bend swallowed him. I thought that would be the end of it. But the next day, he returned. No car this time. I spotted him through the screen door, walking slowly up the dirt lane from the direction of the highway, sweat darkening his shirt under the arms, his city shoes caked in dust. He stopped at the east gate, resting one hand on the wood, as if unsure whether to push it open. I didn't go to him right away. I finished rinsing the dust off my hands, hung the towel by the sink, and took the long way around the porch. When I reached the gate from inside the fence, I didn't open it immediately. "Mum," he said, a little breathless. "We need to talk." His eyes were restless, flicking over the fields behind me, like the land might disappear if he didn't keep checking. I could see the calculation in them, the kind that has nothing to do with soil quality or crop yields. I unlatched the gate, stepped through, and held out the long-handled shovel I'd been leaning on. Not thrusting it at him, not offering it either. Just holding it out in the space between us. "If you need something from this land," I said, "start here." His brow furrowed. "What is this? Some kind of punishment?" "No," I said. "It's the only transaction left." He stared at the shovel like it was a language he'd forgotten how to read. "You're being cruel," he said finally. I tilted my head. "I'm being clear." For a moment, something flickered across his face. The boy who used to run barefoot through the orchard, falling asleep under the plum trees with dirt under his nails. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man whose dreams were built on the assumption of ownership, not the earning of it. "Linda's mother already put money down on the design firm," he muttered. "We had plans. You didn't even warn us." "I'm not required to warn you," I said evenly. "Especially when you didn't ask permission to spend what wasn't yours." His jaw tightened. He didn't argue further. He simply stepped back, eyes still searching my face for something I wasn't offering, then turned and walked down the road. Dust rose around his shoes, clinging to the air long after he disappeared. I stayed there a moment longer, leaning on the shovel, watching the gravel settle. Then I walked back inside, washed my hands, and opened the envelope Eleanor had given me. I slid it into the top drawer of my desk, under Daniel's old recipe cards. Some things needed to be kept close. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're clarity. People will call you harsh when you stop giving them what they've been taking without asking. But protecting what you've built isn't an act of revenge. It's an act of love, for the work, the legacy, and for yourself. 3 mornings later, the newspaper landed with a dull thump in my mailbox. I carried it to the porch, tea steaming in my hand. The headline stretched across the fold. "High Ridge Farm launches fellowship for young growers statewide." Below it was a photo of me standing beside the new greenhouse frame, sunlight on my shoulder, 3 students around me. One, a shy girl in a denim cap, was half hiding behind her seedling tray. The other 2 were grinning like they'd just been given the keys to something bigger than themselves. The article spoke of acreage, legacy, sustainability. It didn't mention Evan. It didn't need to. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed. A sharp, insistent vibration on the kitchen counter. Caller ID private number. When I answered, the voice was tight, hurried, and just a little out of breath. "This is Veronica Hayes," Tessa's mother said. "I thought we had an understanding. Evan told me everything was set. We booked the cabin upgrade based on that. You can't just freeze the cards now. This was supposed to be the year he transferred the deed." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't even call me by name. "I suggest you speak to your attorney," I said, and hung up. That afternoon, I was weeding near the old grape arbor when I saw a stranger leaning against the east fence. Tall, mid-40s, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and boots that had seen real work. He didn't move as I approached. "Can I help you?" I called. He lifted his head slowly. "Name's Grant Bishop. I'm a land broker out of Sacramento. Your son reached out to me a few months back." I stopped 3 steps from the fence, the sun at my back casting a long shadow over the grass between us. "He said he'd be inheriting soon." Grant continued, "Wanted a market estimate." I told him I don't get involved until papers are signed. But then I saw the article this morning. "Why are you telling me this now?" His eyes narrowed, studying my face. "Because people like your son, they don't just quit when the money's that close. And because I knew your husband. Daniel was one of the few who never tried to cut corners. I figure you deserve to know who's been circling your fence." I didn't answer. Grant tipped his hat, turned. and walked back toward a dust-colored pickup parked down the road. By evening, the air was thick with the smell of lavender and something else. Anticipation. I'd been expecting a storm, and it came just after sundown. Tessa showed up first, her heels sinking into the gravel like she didn't realize what kind of ground she was standing on. Evan trailed behind, his shirt wrinkled, eyes hard. "You humiliated us," Tessa said before I'd even reached the porch steps, posting that fellowship like it's some great act of charity. "Everyone knows you did it to cut us out." I stayed on the top step, the height giving me just enough distance to breathe. "I did it," I said evenly, "because this land is for work, not for cashing in." Evan's voice was quieter, but it cut deeper. Dad would have wanted me to have it. I met his eyes, and for a moment I almost softened. Until I remembered the insurance policy, the ledger entries, the way he'd sat in his car that day without the courage to walk to the gate. "No, Evan," I said. "Your father would have wanted it cared for." Tessa folded her arms. "We're not leaving without something." And then, from the far side of the yard, a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Maybe you should leave with your dignity. Before you lose that too." We all turned. Eleanor was standing there, boots dusty from the walk, holding a manila envelope. She'd come unannounced, but not unprepared. "This," she said, lifting the envelope slightly, "is a formal notice. Any further harassment or misrepresentation about the property will be met with legal action. You've been warned." Evan's jaw worked, but he didn't speak. Tessa shot me one last glare before stalking toward the car. As they pulled away, Eleanor stepped up onto the porch beside me. "You're going to need thicker walls," she said. "And I don't just mean fences." Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table with the windows open. The sound of the hives carried in on the breeze, a steady hum, unbothered by the chaos of the day. I thought about Grant's warning, about the way Evan's eyes had shifted when Eleanor appeared. This wasn't over. But for now, the ground was mine. When you protect something worth keeping, the fight doesn't always end when you say no. Sometimes it only ends when the other side realizes you're not just guarding a thing. You're guarding the values it was built on. And that's a battle they can't win without becoming someone else entirely. A week passed without word from Evan or Tessa. The fellowship students came and went, their laughter spilling across the lavender rows like sunlight breaking through morning fog. It was almost enough to make me believe the worst was behind me. Almost. On the 8th day, I found a note tucked under the latch of the greenhouse door. The paper was creased, folded twice, my name written in a hand I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Lane, I'd like to speak with you privately about an opportunity. You may find it mutually beneficial. RC, no phone number, no address, just the initials." I slipped the note into my pocket and went about my work, but my mind kept turning the letters over like stones in my hand. RC, I didn't know any RC. That afternoon, Kira, the shy fellowship student in the denim cap, lingered after the others had left. She was twisting her hands together, her eyes darting toward the greenhouse before finally looking at me. "There's a man," she began. "He's been coming around when you're not here. Said he's a friend of your son. Hey, he asked me questions." I kept my face calm. "What kind of questions?" "About the trust. About you. He said if I could just tell him when you're alone, he could help clear things up for the family." Her voice dropped on the last word, like she wasn't sure it was the right one to use. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the one that comes when danger doesn't announce itself loudly. It just steps quietly inside the fence. "Did he say his name?" I asked. Kira hesitated. Reed Carver, RC. That evening, I sat on the porch with the ledger open on my lap, not to write in it, but to remind myself of Daniel's steady lines, the weight of his care. The air was cooling fast, the first hints of autumn curling in under the scent of lavender. I didn't hear the car until its headlights washed over the east fence. A dark sedan this time. The door opened, and a tall man in a crisp jacket stepped out, carrying himself like someone used to getting into places he didn't belong. "Mez. Lane?" His voice was smooth, practiced. "I think we have some common interests. Do we?" I said, staying seated. He smiled faintly. "Evan's a good man. Just misunderstood. He's only trying to preserve what's his." "What's his?" I said. "Isn't here?" "Not yet." Reed's eyes glinted in the fading light. "But you can change that." and I can make sure you're more than comfortable for the rest of your life." He took a step closer to the gate, the gravel crunching under his shoes. It was a sound I'd learned to measure, how close someone was willing to get before they showed their real intent. "Leave," I said simply. He tilted his head, as if amused. "Think about it, Mrs. Lane. Doors don't stay locked forever." He walked back to the car, the taillights fading into the dark. Later, I sat at my desk and dialed Eleanor. When she answered, I didn't waste time. "We've got a new player." "Name?" she asked. "Reed Carver." There was a pause on the line, then her voice sharpened. "He's not just a broker. He's a fixer. The kind people hire when they want results off the record." As I hung up, I realized something Evan wasn't coming at me head on anymore. He was looking for cracks. And now, the fight wasn't just about holding the land. It was about making sure no one inside these gates, not even the students I'd taken under my wing, could be turned into an opening. And that, I thought, was a different kind of war entirely. Not all threats knock on the front door. Some slip in through the people you've welcomed inside. Guarding what matters isn't just about locking the gate. It's about making sure the ones inside aren't carrying the keys to your undoing. The next Saturday, the fellowship students arrived as usual, their chatter filling the yard. I was sorting through trays of seedlings when I noticed Kira hanging back near the gate, her cap pulled low, eyes fixed on the gravel. She didn't greet me like she usually did. "Kira," I called gently, "come give me a hand with these." She hesitated before walking over, her steps slow, deliberate. As she reached for the tray, I saw it, the faint imprint of folded paper in her back pocket. We worked in silence for a few minutes. The other students had scattered across the fields, laughing, trading tools, starting the day's work. Only the two of us stood in the shade of the greenhouse. "Kira," I said, keeping my voice even, "what's in your pocket?" Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "It's nothing. Just notes." I held out my hand. "Let me see." She shifted uncomfortably before pulling out a small white envelope. No name on the front, just a neat block, letter K. I didn't have to open it to know whose initials would be at the bottom. Inside was a crisp $100 bill and a handwritten message. "Find out where she keeps the trust papers. Report back. Another 100 when you do. RC." The world seemed to narrow for a moment, sound and color draining from the edges. When they came back, it was with the steady hum of bees somewhere beyond the trellis. "Where did you get this?" I asked. Kira's voice was barely above a whisper. "He found me outside the co-op last night. Said he was helping your family sort out a misunderstanding." I didn't think. She broke off, blinking hard. "You didn't think it mattered." I finished for her. Her lip trembled. "I'm sorry." I took the envelope and slipped it into my apron pocket. "Kira, listen to me. This isn't about me being angry at you. This is about you understanding that some people will use kindness as a door, and they'll walk through without asking." She nodded, tears gathering, but I could see the shame rooting itself in her shoulders. That evening, after the students had gone, I walked the fence line, the envelope still in my pocket. At the far corner by the peach trees, I spotted something unusual, a small gap near the base of the east gate, just wide enough for a hand to slip through. The latch looked untouched, but the soil beneath was freshly disturbed. Someone had been testing the perimeter. 2 days later, Eleanor came by. She sat at my kitchen table, flipping the envelope's contents onto the wood. "This is proof of attempted interference," she said. "If he pushes further, we can use it." "But proof won't stop him from trying again," I said. "He's not after a legal win. He's after a slip. One mistake." Eleanor looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "Then don't give him one." The next morning, I made a decision. The trust documents, the originals, had been locked in the metal safe under my desk since the day Eleanor handed them to me. I moved them to a safer place, a concealed compartment Daniel had built years ago in the floor of the old honey house, disguised beneath a rack of unused hive frames. Daniel always said, "If you hide something important, put it somewhere people think is too much trouble to look." I locked the honey house and slipped the key into the lining of my jacket. By late afternoon, the students returned for their midweek session. This time, I watched them more closely. Who lingered, who strayed near the house, who seemed a little too curious about locked doors. Reed hadn't shown himself again, but I knew better than to think he'd gone away. Men like him preferred to watch from the edges, waiting for someone inside to turn the handle. And as I stood there in the lavender rose, the sun sinking behind the ridge, I realized the real battle wasn't with Evan or even Reed. It was with time, and whether I could hold the line long enough to pass this land to the right hands, before the wrong ones found their way in. Threats don't always smash the gate. Sometimes they slip in as whispers, as doubts, as small temptations. Guarding your legacy means guarding the people in it, even when they don't yet understand what they're being protected from. The first sign was subtle. So subtle I almost missed it. 2 of the lavender rows near the south fence had gone pale overnight, their stems wilting despite regular watering. I crouched, running my fingers over the soil. It was damp, but the smell was wrong, sharp, chemical. Not the earthy, sweet scent it should have been. Someone had poisoned the plants. By midday, the damage spread in a jagged pattern along the row, like a scar across the field. The students noticed it too, their voices carrying an uneasy edge. Is Lane, what happened? One of them asked. I didn't answer right away. My eyes drifted to the east fence, to the narrow gap I'd patched just last week. Fresh scuff marks marred the bottom rail. That evening, a post appeared on the local community board online. A photo of my lavender field. The damaged section front and center, with the caption sad to see High Ridge Farm in decline. Maybe it's time for new management. The account posting it had no profile picture, just a generic icon. But the timing, the tone, it stank of Reed. By the next morning, the post had been shared dozens of times. Some comments were sympathetic, others not. She's too old to manage that kind of property. Maybe her son should take over. Heard he has big plans. The words were like weeds, rooting fast in shallow soil. Eleanor came by that afternoon, her expression set like stone. This is coordinated, she said, scrolling through the thread on her phone. He's building a narrative, painting you as incapable. Then we cut him off. I said, it's not that simple. The more you defend yourself publicly, the more oxygen you give it. We need a counterweight. The next day, I called the fellowship students together. We stood in a semicircle near the old honey house, the late summer sun pouring down. I'm going to tell you something. I began, my voice steady. Someone is trying to make it look like this place is failing. They think if they can convince enough people, they can take what they didn't earn. I looked from face to face, gauging their reactions. Kira's eyes were wet but determined. Another student, Matteo, stepped forward. Then let's show them they're wrong. It was a simple sentence, but it shifted the air. The next hour, we worked side by side, replanting damaged rows, hauling fresh compost, staking new shoots. I didn't need to tell them this was more than gardening. That night, as I closed up the greenhouse, I spotted a figure near the far fence line, tall, still, watching. The dusk light turned his outline into something almost spectral. Carver, I called. He didn't move for a moment, then stepped forward just enough for the light to catch his face. Impressive, he said, nodding toward the replanted rows. But you can't stop the weather. This isn't weather, I said. It's sabotage. He smiled faintly. Call it what you like. Everyone has a breaking point, Mrs. Lane. I'm just here to help you find yours. And with that, he turned and walked into the dark. I locked every gate that night, but sleep didn't come easily. Because Reed was right about one thing. Everyone has a breaking point. The question was whether mine would come before I could secure the future of this land. When someone can't win fairly, they'll try to break you in the court of public opinion first. The real challenge isn't just defending what you have. It's refusing to let them define who you are in the eyes of everyone else. The morning of the harvest fair dawned bright and sharp, the kind of autumn day that makes colors feel almost too vivid to be real. High Ridge Farm had hosted a booth at the fair for decades. Honey jars lined in neat rows, lavender bundles tied with twine, and little sachets Daniel used to hand out to children for sweet dreams. This year, I wasn't sure I should go. The online chatter hadn't died down since the sabotage. Reed's anonymous posts had fed a steady drip of doubt into the community, and now every smile from a neighbor felt just a shade too polite, every greeting a little too cautious. But I went anyway. By mid-morning, the fairgrounds buzzed with voices, the smell of fried dough and kettle corn hanging in the air. Our booth was at the far end, under a striped canopy that once belonged to Daniel's father. I'd just arranged the first row of honey jars when I felt it. That prickle at the back of my neck that said I was being watched. Turning, I saw Evan and Tessa standing 20 feet away. Not approaching, not even speaking to each other. Just watching. And beside them, leaning on the split rail fence like he owned the view, was Reed Carver. They didn't move, but the message was clear: we're here. And so is everyone else. Half an hour later, the moment came. I was explaining the fellowship program to a young couple when a man in a flannel shirt stepped up, voice raised just enough to carry. Funny to hear about this fellowship, Mrs. Lane. Some of us heard you can't even keep your own fields healthy. It was deliberate, a public jab. Heads turned. The couple's smiles faltered. Before I could speak, another voice cut in from behind the man. That's a lie. I've seen her fields. Healthier than most operations, twice the size. The crowd shifted, and a man stepped forward. Tall, silver-haired, weathered in the way only years of sun and wind can do. His eyes locked on mine, and something in my chest tightened. Tom Reddick, he said, offering a calloused hand. Daniel and I worked together back before the first hives went in. We were friends. I shook his hand, still processing. I haven't seen you since. Since before the zoning fight. He finished for me. I was out of state. Just came back this summer. Tom turned to the crowd, his voice carrying like a man used to talking over wind in open fields. I was here when Daniel swore this land would stay in honest hands. If you think someone else can run it better than Margaret, you're a fool. Murmurs rippled through the listeners. Evan's jaw clenched, Tessa's eyes narrowed. Reed didn't move, but I saw the flicker. A recalculation. After the crowd thinned, Tom stayed. We sat on 2 folding chairs behind the booth. The noise of the fair a low hum in the distance. I didn't just show up for the fair, he said, leaning in. There's something you need to see. Daniel gave it to me years ago, told me to hold on to it until I thought you'd need it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small tin box. The kind people used to keep letters in. Inside was a stack of papers, copies of correspondence, property evaluations, and one sealed envelope with Daniel's handwriting across the front. For Margaret, if the farm is ever in jeopardy. My fingers hovered over the seal. What's in it? Tom shook his head. Didn't look. Figured it wasn't mine to open. Back at the farm that night, I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope under the lamplight. The air was still, the fields outside dark. For a long time, I just stared at Daniel's handwriting, hearing his voice in my head. When I finally broke the seal, there were only 2 things inside: a single-page letter and a folded map of the property. But the lines on the map weren't the ones I knew. The letter began, Margaret, if you're reading this, it means someone is trying to take what we built. There's more to this land than most people know. That map shows the original survey, before the county redrew the lines. The well in the north field sits on an unclaimed section that isn't under our deed. But under the right claim, it can secure water rights for the entire ridge. Whoever controls that well controls far more than our farm. I kept this quiet to protect us. If it's ever threatened, use it. Daniel, I laid the map flat, tracing the red markings, the north field, the old well. Suddenly, Reed's persistence made more sense. This wasn't just about our farm. It was about control of the ridge itself. And now, I had the key Daniel had hidden all along. Sometimes the real power in what you own isn't obvious, and the people coming for it might know more than you think. Protecting your legacy means knowing every inch of it yourself, so no one else can use what you don't understand against you. The next morning, I walked to the north field before the sun had burned the mist off the ridge. The grass was slick under my boots, the air carrying that mineral tang only early morning well water has. I hadn't been up here in years. The old well sat behind a half-collapsed shed, boards gray and splintered. Wild mint spilling out from the cracks. Daniel had planted that mint, said it would keep snakes away. I smiled faintly, thinking how he'd been wrong about the snakes, at least the kind that walked on 2 legs. The map from his envelope was in my pocket, folded along creases that had grown soft with time. When I laid it against the rim of the well, the markings lined up perfectly. This wasn't just an old water source. It was the crown jewel. With the right filing, it could lock water rights for the entire ridge into the trust. Without it, Reed's vision of carving the land into rental lots was just dust. Back at the kitchen table, Eleanor studied the map like it was a loaded weapon. "If you register this claim," she said, "the trust's position becomes untouchable. But if they catch wind of it before it's processed, they'll fight it. They'll do more than fight. They'll try to get there first." For the next 3 days, I moved quietly, no posts online, no conversations in town. The students worked the lower fields. I made excuses to keep them away from the north. Only Kira seemed to notice the shift, her eyes following me more than usual. I wasn't sure if it was guilt from the envelope incident or curiosity, and I didn't have the luxury of asking. On the 4th morning, as Eleanor and I drove toward the county records office, with the map locked in her briefcase, I saw him, Reed, standing beside his dark sedan at the edge of the highway, phone to his ear, watching us pass. He didn't wave. He didn't have to. The message was clear: "I know you're moving." At the office, Eleanor handled the filing. Her voice was calm, her posture relaxed, but I could see the urgency in the way her fingers moved across the paperwork. When the clerk stamped the documents, the sound echoed like the closing of a door. One Reed would find locked when he reached for the handle. "It's done," she said as we stepped outside. But the victory felt thin, too easy. That night, the phone rang. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me said to pick up. "Mom." Evan's voice was low, almost a talk. "I don't think we do. This isn't about the farm," he said. "It's about Dad." There's something you don't know." I stayed silent. "I can't say it over the phone. Meet me tomorrow. Just you." I hung up without promising anything. But sleep didn't come. Daniel's envelope sat on the desk, the map beside it. I wondered if the two men who had shaped my life, one by building, the other by trying to take, were now tangled in ways I hadn't imagined. And in the dark, I realized the truth: securing the well might have won me the legal battle. But the war was still moving, shifting, looking for another way in. Winning one fight doesn't mean the war is over. Sometimes, the moment you think you've secured your ground is the moment your opponent changes the battlefield entirely. Staying ahead means being ready for the next front before it opens. The next afternoon was cold for autumn, the kind of chill that seeps into your sleeves before you realize it. Evan had chosen the old picnic table at Miller's Grove, a public park on the far side of town. I arrived early, partly out of habit, partly because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me walk up while he waited. He was already there, hunched over, elbows on the table. No Tessa, no polished jacket, just a flannel shirt I recognized from years ago, when he still came home to help with harvests. "You came," he said without looking up. "You asked." For a moment, we just listened to the wind moving through the bare branches. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out a thin manila folder. "This is about Dad," he said, sliding it across the table. I didn't touch it. "Go on." He exhaled slowly. "A few months before he died, Dad met with someone, a woman named Claudia Miles. I didn't know who she was at first, but..." He tapped the folder. "She's an environmental consultant, specialized in water rights and land use." "That doesn't surprise me," I said. "He always kept an eye on the regulations." Evan shook his head. "No, Mom. She wasn't working for him. She was working for a developer, the same company I've been talking to." I felt my pulse quicken. "You're saying Daniel was..." "I'm saying he was negotiating about the North Field." He met my eyes, and for once, there wasn't the usual challenge there. Just something closer to wariness. "I think he was going to sell the well rights." I opened the folder. Inside were copies of emails, Daniel's name in the signature line, messages discussing preliminary valuations, potential revenue, even timelines. One email from Claudia Reed. "Once the easement is granted, the company can move forward immediately. The payment will secure the family for decades." The dates were 6 weeks before his accident. My fingers tightened on the paper. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because," Ivan said, "you've been building your whole defense around the idea that Dad wanted the land untouched. But maybe that's not true. Maybe I'm not the only one who thought it could be more." A gust of wind lifted the edge of the folder, and for a moment I saw Daniel's handwriting in my mind. "If the farm is ever in jeopardy," and wondered if jeopardy meant something different to him than it did to me. "Why bring this to me, Ivan? If it makes you look like you're following in his footsteps, why not use it yourself?" Because Reed's using it, he said. He got to Claudia. He's going to make it public. And when he does, you'll lose the moral high ground. The fellowship, the trust. It'll all look like a cover story. I studied his face. The stubble along his jaw. The tightness around his eyes. So this is a warning. It's a chance, he said. If we work together, we can control the story before he does. On the drive home, the folder sat on the passenger seat, heavy despite the few sheets inside. The map from Daniel's envelope was still locked in the honey house, the inked lines marking the well as the beating heart of the ridge. But now those lines looked different, like veins feeding more than just the farm. Back at the house, I stood in the kitchen, the folder open on the counter, steam curling from the kettle. I thought about the Daniel I'd known, the man who fought to keep the county from rezoning us, who planted mint to keep snakes away. And I thought about the man in those emails, weighing the value of water in numbers, not in seasons. Maybe they were the same man. Maybe I'd just never wanted to see that part. When night fell, I took the folder to the desk, slid it into the drawer beside Daniel's letter, and locked it. The two truths sat there together, side by side, like neighbors who couldn't decide if they were friends or enemies. The war hadn't changed, but the ground I was fighting on suddenly felt less certain beneath my feet. Sometimes the legacy you're protecting isn't as pure as you believed. The real test isn't whether you can keep it untouched. It's whether you can live with its history and still choose the right future for it. It started with a headline. I was making tea just after sunrise when my phone buzzed with 3 messages in quick succession, all from different numbers. The first was from Alice, my neighbor. Margaret, have you seen the Gazette? The second was a screenshot of the front page, local farm hero or hypocrite. Secret talks to sell water rights discovered. Beneath it was a grainy photo of Daniel, taken years ago, and a pull quote from one of the emails in Evan's folder. The payment will secure the family for decades. The third message was from Kara. This isn't true, is it? By mid-morning, the calls started. Some were reporters. Others were neighbors pretending to check in, but really fishing for a reaction. The online comments were worse. Dozens of voices demanding to know why I'd kept the fellowship running if I was just like the developers I'd warned against. Eleanor arrived before noon, her face tight. She dropped the Gazette on the table and poured herself coffee without asking. This is Carver's doing, she said. He got those emails and fed them to the press. He's trying to make you look like Daniel's co-conspirator. I wasn't, I said automatically. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt the doubt threading in. Not about myself, but about Daniel. That doesn't matter, Eleanor said. Perception is reality right now. If you don't control the narrative, someone else will. The fellowship students were due that afternoon. I considered canceling, but then I thought about Kira's text, about the way fear can rot faster than truth if left alone. When they arrived, I gathered them in the orchard. The air smelled of ripe peaches and the faint tang of bee boxes warming in the sun. You've all seen what's being said, I began. Yes. Daniel had talks with people about the well. No, I wasn't part of those talks. And no, this farm is not for sale. Not to them. Not to anyone who sees it as just a profit margin. I paused, meeting their eyes one by one. But telling you isn't enough. If we're going to fight this, it has to be seen. Matteo spoke up first. What do you want us to do? By the end of the hour, we had a plan. The next morning, we set up an open workday at the farm. Anyone from the community could come, plant, harvest, see the operation for themselves. Students posted on social media, not with defensive statements, but with photos, hands planting seedlings, kids feeding chickens, the beehives humming under a bright sky. Within 48 hours, dozens of people came through the gates. Some were curious, others skeptical, but all left with something tangible. A jar of honey, a bundle of lavender, a conversation with someone who worked the soil. Carver didn't stay quiet. On the third day of the open work, a new post appeared on the community board. Nice PR stunt. Doesn't change the fact that deals were being made behind closed doors. This time, the replies were different. People who had come to the farm pushed back. I was there yesterday. This place is the real thing. My son learned more about farming in 2 hours than in a semester at school. Show me another developer who lets you take home free eggs. It wasn't a win, not yet. But it was a crack in the wall Carver had built. That evening, as the last visitor left, I stood at the east gate and looked out toward the road. The sun was setting, the light cutting across the fields in long gold bars. A dark sedan idled in the distance. Carver watching, I raised my hand, not to wave, but to point back toward the land behind me. The fellowship students were still working, their voices carrying on the wind. This wasn't just my voice anymore. It was ours. And that, I realized, was the one thing Carver couldn't twist into his own story. When your story is stolen, the only way to take it back is to live it so visibly and so honestly that lies can't stick. The truth needs witnesses, and the more voices that share it, the louder it becomes. It started with little things. A bag of seed gone missing from the supply shed. A tray of seedlings knocked over in the greenhouse. No footprints. No broken glass. Just the plants tipped and drying in the sun. A whispered argument between two of the fellowship students that went silent the second I walked into the barn. At first, I chalked it up to the chaos of a busy season. But then I saw the look on Matteo's face one afternoon. Guarded, almost guilty. And I knew something was shifting. The break came 3 days later. I was showing Kira how to check for mites on the hives when she blurted it out. "Matteo said you're not telling us everything," she said, eyes fixed on the frame of bees between us. "He said there's money in the trust for us, but you're keeping it locked away." I kept my voice even. "Did he say where he heard that?" She hesitated. "No. Just that someone told him you and Evan were fighting over it, and you decided we didn't deserve to know." The hum of the bees filled the pause between us. "Kira," I said, "there's no money for you to miss out on. The trust covers the farm's upkeep and the fellowship's expenses." "That's it." She nodded, but her shoulders were stiff. That night, after the students had gone, I walked the fence line. Halfway to the north field, I spotted it, a cigarette butt, still warm. Near the same gap in the east gate I'd patched weeks ago. None of my students smoked. I didn't need to see him to know it was Carver. He was close enough now to plant ideas, not just footprints. The next day, I called the students together in the orchard. The air was sharp with the scent of apples starting to ripen, the light slanting gold through the leaves. "I'm going to say this once," I began. "This program works because we trust each other. But there are people outside this fence who want you to believe I'm keeping something from you. They'll use half-truths or money, or whatever they think will turn you against this place. And once they've done that, they'll take it from all of us." I let the silence settle before continuing. "If you hear something that makes you doubt, ask me first. If you see something that feels wrong, tell me. We can't stop people from trying to divide us, but we can refuse to make it easy for them." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Matteo stepped forward, hands in his pockets. "I shouldn't have repeated what I heard," he said. "A guy came by the feed store when I was there last week. Said he knew Evan. Offered me cash for information. I didn't take it, but I didn't tell you either." "Next time," I said, "you tell me." He nodded, and I could see some of the tension ease from the group. That evening, I stood on the porch watching the last light fade from the fields. Somewhere out there, Carver was still waiting. But so was I. And now, I wasn't the only one guarding the gate. Division is the oldest trick in the book for those who want to take what isn't theirs. The best defense isn't walls or locks. It's a community that refuses to turn on itself, no matter what bait is dangled in front of them. It was a Saturday morning, crisp and bright, the kind of day when the air feels lighter than it should. The fellowship students were spread across the lower fields, some weeding, some tending the hives. I was checking the irrigation line when I heard it. The sound of engines, more than one, pulling up the gravel drive. By the time I reached the porch, 3 vehicles were parked just outside the east gate. 2 SUVs and, in the middle, a sleek black sedan. The driver's door of the sedan opened, and Reed Carver stepped out. He wasn't alone. Avon followed, then Tessa, her sunglasses reflecting the rows of lavender like shards of glass. Behind them, a handful of townspeople I recognized from the fair. Some friendly, some not, stood in a loose semicircle. A camera crew from the local news station trailed at the back, adjusting tripods and sound gear. Reed walked forward, stopping just shy of the gate. "Mrs. Lane?" he said, voice carrying. We thought it was time the public heard the full story. I didn't move from the top step. "You've been telling your version for weeks." He smiled like I'd just given him a perfect opening. Yes, but this time, you'll have a chance to respond in front of witnesses. The cameraman raised his lens. Avon stepped forward, hands spread as if he were the reasonable one here. Mom, this doesn't have to be a fight. Just tell them what Dad was planning. Be honest. Honest, I said, my voice calm but carrying. You mean like the part where you tried to transfer the deed behind my back? Or the insurance policy with your name on it? A ripple went through the small crowd. Reed cut in smoothly. We're not here to argue details. We're here because this land is bigger than one person's stubbornness. The community deserves a say. From the corner of my eye, I saw Matteo and Kira at the edge of the field, their tools forgotten watching. I stepped down from the porch, closing the distance to the gate. This community has always had a say. They say it every time they buy a jar of honey, every time they walk these rows and see the work that goes into keeping them alive. What you want isn't a say, it's a sale. A Reed's smile thinned. And what if I told you Daniel agreed with me? I held his gaze. Then I'd say you never knew Daniel. For a moment, no one spoke. The camera caught everything. The tightness in Reed's jaw, the way Tessa's fingers curled around her purse strap, the flicker of doubt in Evan's eyes. That's when I made my move, Kira, I called. They came forward, unsure. Tell them what this farm means to you. Kira glanced at the camera, then back at me. It's the first place I've ever worked where what I do matters. Where I'm not just clocking hours. Matteo added, this place feeds people. Teaches people. You can't buy that. Their voices shifted the air. Even the townspeople who'd come with Reed were listening now, their expressions softer, less certain. Reed saw it too. His smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. This isn't over, he said quietly enough that only I could hear. Good, I replied. I'd hate for you to miss the harvest. He turned, signaling to his crew. One by one, they climbed into their vehicles. Evan lingered a moment longer, his eyes searching mine for something I wasn't offering. Then he followed. When the last car disappeared down the drive, the students clustered near the porch. The tension that had stretched the morning finally eased, replaced by the hum of bees and the smell of earth warming under the sun. But I knew this wasn't the end. Reed had just tested the gate. Next time, he might try the walls. Sometimes the best way to face an attack is in the open, with your community at your side. Bullies thrive in shadows. Bring them into the light, and you take away their favorite weapon. It was Eleanor who brought the news. She arrived just after dawn, the air still cold enough to bite. I saw her car from the kitchen window, dust trailing behind it down the gravel drive. She didn't bother with pleasantries, just set her leather briefcase on the table and looked at me in a way that made my stomach tighten. Margaret, she said, we have a problem. From the briefcase, she pulled a thin folder stamped Suandi Racoards, Eminenti Request. Across the top was a familiar name, Highridge Farm. Below it, in crisp black letters, petitioner Evan Lane, legal counsel Reed Carver. The request wasn't for a transfer, it was for a correction. They're claiming, Eleanor said, that the original deed Daniel signed in 1989 was filed under the wrong property description, and that a portion of your north field, including the well, was never legally transferred to you. My throat went dry. That's impossible. Daniel fought for that land. We have the deed. We have a deed, Eleanor said. But county archives are missing the survey map from that year. Without it, the description in the deed is vulnerable. I thought of the map in Daniel's envelope, the one marked with the well in red. I'd assumed it was a safeguard. Now I saw it for what it really was. A quiet acknowledgement that something in our paperwork was flawed, and Daniel had kept it hidden. Why now? I asked, though I already knew. Eleanor's mouth was a thin line. Because with that well, Reed can control water rights for the entire ridge, and because public opinion is shaky enough that the county might not rush to defend you. That afternoon, I walked to the north field. The air was warm, bees drifting lazily between wildflowers at the edges. The old well sat in its ring of mint, the boards of the shed groaning softly in the wind. I crouched beside it, running my hand along the stone rim. This was the heart of everything, the water, the trust, the fight. And now Reed had found a way to put his hands on it, without stepping a foot inside my gates. Back at the house, I spread Daniel's map on the table. The red ink lines glared up at me, a reminder that he had known about the flaw and chosen not to fix it. Maybe he'd been waiting for the right moment. Maybe he thought no one would ever find it. Now I had to decide whether to use it to defend myself, or risk exposing something that could undo more than just this battle. That night Evan called. His voice was taut, deliberate. "Mom, you can stop this before it gets ugly. Sign over the Northfield, keep the rest. No one has to know about the deed problem. And if I don't?" There was a pause. "Then you'll lose it all when the county rules. And it won't just be the Northfield. The trust could be challenged too." I hung up without answering. Outside, the orchard was quiet under the moon, branches heavy with late fruit. Somewhere in the dark, the well sat waiting, a silent witness to every choice that had led here. I knew one thing for certain. Reed was done with shadows. The next move would be in daylight, and it would decide more than just who owned the land. Sometimes the greatest threat isn't theft, but the quiet exploitation of something you didn't know was broken. Protecting what's yours means knowing its history, every line, every flaw, better than anyone who might use it against you. The meeting room at the county building smelled faintly of paper and coffee gone stale. Long wooden benches lined the back, and every seat was filled. Farmers in boots, townspeople in pressed shirts, even a couple of reporters with recorders ready. They'd all come to see the fight over High Ridge Farm. At the front, a row of county commissioners sat behind a wide table. Their expressions were neutral, but I'd been around long enough to know neutrality was just the mask they wore before the vote. On the left side of the room, Reed Carver sat with Evan. Reed's suit was sharp, his tie a perfect knot. Evan looked more casual, but his eyes were hard. Between them was a neat stack of files, the kind you bring when you're planning to win by paperwork. Eleanor sat beside me on the right. She leaned in just before the session started. "Remember, don't let them pull you into an emotional argument. This has to stay about facts." The chairwoman called the session to order, and Reed was first to speak. He walked to the podium like a man stepping onto a stage. "Members of the commission," he began, "this is not about sentiment. This is about a legal oversight from 1989. Due to a missing survey map, the description of High Ridge Farm in the original deed did not include the northern parcel, which contains the primary well. My client, Evan Lane, is entitled to claim that parcel under county property law." He laid out documents, each one stamped and tabbed. Then he read aloud from the emails between Daniel and Claudia Miles, framing them as proof Daniel intended to separate the Northfield. The murmurs in the room were like low thunder. When it was our turn, Eleanor rose. "The petitioner is correct that the original deed description is incomplete," she said, voice calm. "However, intent and possession are separate matters. Mrs. Lane has maintained, improved, and exclusively controlled that parcel for 34 years, with no contest until now. Under the doctrine of adverse possession, she is the rightful owner, and I have the records to prove continuous use." She handed the commissioners a folder. Inside were photos dating back to the 1990s. Daniel repairing the shed by the well, me tending the mint beds, receipts for maintenance and water testing. Every year accounted for. Reed stood again, a faint smile on his face. Continuous use is irrelevant if the original owner's heir asserts claim before the statutory period resets. That's the key. Eleanor replied, already on her feet. "Mr. Lane is not the original owner's heir in this matter, because Daniel Lane transferred all rights to his wife in 1989. And here," she lifted a sealed plastic sleeve, "is the missing survey map, recovered from Daniel's personal archives." Gasps rippled through the room. I hadn't planned to use it. The map had been hidden in the honey house for years, Daniel's secret safeguard. But when Eleanor met my eyes that morning, I knew holding it back would be the same as handing the well to Reed. "This map," Eleanor continued, "shows the northern parcel included in the intended boundaries. The absence of this document from the county file was a clerical error, not a matter of ownership. Correct the file, and the claim disappears." The commissioners retreated for deliberation. The room buzzed with whispered speculation. Evan avoided my gaze, staring instead at the grain of the table in front of him. Reed, however, met my eyes directly, and for the first time since I'd met him, there was no smile. When the commissioners returned, the chairwoman spoke. "The record will be corrected to include the northern parcel under Mrs. Lane's ownership. The petition is denied." Outside, the air was crisp and bright. Eleanor gathered her papers with the precision of a woman who enjoyed a clean win. Evan and Reed left without a word, their steps quick, their shoulders rigid. I knew they weren't done. But the ground under my feet felt steadier than it had in months. When the fight is over what's on paper, the truth you keep hidden can be as powerful as the truth you speak. The key is knowing the right moment to reveal it, when it will close the door for good. It began quietly. A shift in the air I could feel more than see. The students still greeted me each morning, but their voices didn't have quite the same lift. Conversations hushed when I walked by. Laughter died faster than it should. I caught Matteo and another fellow, Jenna, bent over a phone in the greenhouse one afternoon. When they saw me, they straightened so fast they nearly knocked over a tray of seedlings. "Something funny?" I asked. Matteo shook his head. "Just something online." That night, Kira knocked on my office door. She had the look of someone deciding whether to jump into cold water. "They're saying things about you," she said. "Stuff from before Daniel." I set down my pen. "Who's they?" "I don't know for sure. But a post went up on the community board. It says you used to work for a land developer. The same one trying to buy up the ridge now. That you only married Daniel after you knew he had the farm." Her eyes searched mine, like she wanted me to hand her the truth before the doubt had time to root. The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were entirely false, but because they weren't entirely true either. I had worked for a developer in my 20s. It was a job I left long before I met Daniel, one I rarely spoke of because of the projects they'd pushed through. Ugly, soulless subdivisions where orchards used to be. Meeting Daniel had been the first time I'd believed land could be more than a commodity. But Reed knew exactly what to do with half a truth. The next day, the tension spread. A few students still chatted with me easily, but others kept their distance, glancing at me like they were measuring what they'd heard against what they saw. During lunch, Matteo asked, too casually, "So did you really help build those condos over in Riverside?" The table went quiet. "Yes," I said evenly. "And I left before they cut down the last stand of oaks. That's why I came here. Why I fought for this place. Because I know exactly what happens when you don't." No one replied, but I saw a flicker in Kira's expression. A shift from suspicion to something closer to understanding. That evening, Eleanor called. "Reed's fingerprints are all over this," she said. "It's the oldest trick in the book. Make them doubt your integrity, and the rest of the fight gets easier. What's his endgame now? He can't get the land. Maybe not. But if he can peel enough people away from you, the fellowship weakens. And without the fellowship, you lose the shield of public goodwill." I walked the orchard in the dark, the branches black against the night sky. The moon lit the rows just enough for me to see the spaces between them. The gaps where weeds could take root if I didn't keep watch. I realized then that Reed wasn't trying to storm the gates anymore. He was planting inside my walls, hoping I wouldn't notice until the growth was too thick to pull. The next morning I called the students together beneath the arbor. My voice didn't rise, but it carried. Yes, I worked for a developer once. Yes, I left. And yes, I will fight to my last breath to make sure no one like that gets this farm. If anyone here doubts why they're part of this fellowship, I'd rather you leave now than work half-heartedly. No one moved. Even Matteo stayed put. Good, I said. Because out there, I pointed beyond the fence line. They're counting on cracks. We don't give them any. A half-truth is the sharpest blade an enemy can use. It cuts deeper because it looks like honesty at first glance. The only way to blunt it is to own your story before someone else twists it into theirs. It began with a new energy in Jenna. She was the quietest of the fellowship students, the one who often stayed late to sweep the barn or help label honey jars without being asked. Her parents had lost their small orchard years ago to foreclosure, and every dollar she earned went to supporting her younger brother through trade school. But lately, she'd been elsewhere. Distracted during planting, quick to volunteer for jobs near the gate or the roadside, always with her phone in her hand. One Thursday morning, I caught her slipping a folded envelope into her pocket after a delivery truck left. When she saw me, she startled like a deer, mumbling something about just a receipt. That night, Matteo knocked on my office door. "You should know," he said. "Jenna's been meeting someone at the gas station down the road, a guy in a black sedan. Carver. I kept my voice even. How do you know? I saw them talking yesterday when I went to fill up the truck. He handed her something. She looked scared. The next day, I watched from the upper field as Jenna worked along the fence. Every few minutes, her eyes flicked toward the road. Just before lunch, a dark sedan slowed as it passed. The driver didn't stop, but his hand lifted briefly from the wheel. Jenna's shoulders tensed, then she glanced toward the barn. When the students gathered for the midday meal, she lingered behind, her phone in her lap under the table. I caught a glimpse of the screen, a text thread with a contact saved only as R. That evening, I asked Kira to join me in the honey house under the pretense of reorganizing the storage racks. Keep an eye on Jenna, I said quietly. Don't confront her. Just notice where she goes, who she talks to. If Carver's feeding her promises, I need to know how deep he's in. Kira nodded, her jaw set. She'd seen what happened last time trust started to crack. 2 days later, Kira came to me with a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. I found this in Jenna's cubby, she said. She left early today, said she wasn't feeling well. Inside was a brand new phone, still in the plastic. No SIM card, but tucked under the box was a note: use this. Don't tell anyone. Payments every Friday. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Not Carver's. He wouldn't risk that. But it had his fingerprints all over it. That night, I sat at my desk with the package in front of me. Part of me wanted to confront Jenna immediately, to demand the truth, and see if she could look me in the eye. But another part, the part that had survived every ambush so far, knew this wasn't the time to swing blindly. Instead, I called Eleanor. I need you to run a quiet check, I said. Bank deposits, cash movements. Anything tied to Jenna that looks out of place. She didn't ask why. She already knew. In the days that followed, I kept Jenna close. Not to punish her, but to make sure Carver couldn't use her without me seeing it happen. If she was going to be his doorway, I was going to be standing in the frame when he tried to walk through. The strongest walls can still be breached if someone opens the door from the inside. Guarding your legacy isn't just about defending against outsiders. It's about knowing when someone inside has been handed the key and acting before they turn it. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where the air feels heavy, like the sky hasn't decided yet whether to rain. The students were busy in the lower fields, and I was repairing a section of the greenhouse door when I noticed the east gate was unlatched. I never leave the gate unlatched. I walked toward it, my boots crunching over gravel, and saw fresh tire tracks in the damp soil just beyond. They led to a patch of flattened grass near the road, the kind that comes from a vehicle waiting with its engine idling. Inside the barn, something was wrong. The top shelf where we kept the archive boxes was half empty, 2 boxes missing. One of them was labeled in Daniel's handwriting: Mel, Wyatt R. Riggies, 1989-1995. My chest tightened. That box held copies of every water test, maintenance receipt, and correspondence from the years right after we secured the well. It was the living proof Eleanor had used in the hearing to shut down Reed's claim. Without it, the trust might still hold legally, but public defense of my ownership would be crippled. I knew before I even turned around that she was there. Jenna stood in the doorway, her hands jammed into her jacket pockets, eyes locked on the ground. "I'm sorry," she said, but the words were flat, like she'd practiced them. "Where is it?" I asked. She didn't answer. "Jenna?" I said, softer now. "Look at me." Her eyes lifted, and for a moment I saw the girl who'd arrived here months ago, shy and eager to learn. But then her jaw set. "I didn't think it would hurt anything." "He said you had copies." "He said, Carver?" I asked. She flinched. Before I could say more, a voice from outside cut through the air. "She's right, you know. I just needed to fill in a few blanks." Reed stood by the open gate, one hand resting casually on the post. Behind him, the trunk of his black sedan was open, and inside I could see the corner of a box. My box. "You've made this harder than it needed to be, Mrs. Lane," he said. "But in the end, everyone has a price." I stepped forward until I was between him and Jenna. "You don't get to talk about her like that. She took the deal," he said with a shrug. "The rest is just sentiment." I glanced back at Jenna. "You can still fix this." Her eyes darted to the trunk, then back to me. I saw the war in her, fear and shame, pride and regret. She hesitated just long enough for Reed to sense the shift. He moved toward the car. That's when I acted. I reached past the gate, slammed it shut, and dropped the iron latch into place. The old hinges groaned, but the lock held. Reed was on the outside now. The trunk still open, but just out of his reach without climbing the fence. "This isn't over," he said, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "It is for today," I replied. He backed away slowly, eyes never leaving mine, then closed the trunk and drove off, the tires spitting gravel in his wake. When he was gone, I turned to Jenna. "If you want to stay, you'll have to earn back every bit of trust you just spent, and it won't be easy." She swallowed hard, then nodded. That night, I carried the box into the honey house and placed it beside Daniel's map in the hidden compartment. The air inside was thick with the scent of beeswax and mint, grounding me. I locked the door and stood in the dark for a long moment. Carver had crossed the line from manipulation to theft. Now I knew he wouldn't stop. And I also knew I couldn't fight this alone anymore. Trust is like water in a well. It takes time to fill, but it can be emptied in a single careless act. The choice to forgive is yours, but the choice to guard more carefully afterward is what keeps the well from running dry. 2 days after the theft attempt, the farm felt different. The fellowship students still came to work, but I could feel the unspoken question hanging in the air. What happens now? I knew the answer couldn't be wait for Carver to make the next move. Eleanor came by late that afternoon, the low sun catching on her glasses as she stepped into the kitchen. "You've been quiet?" she said. "I'm done being quiet," I told her. "If Carver wants to play in the shadows, we'll light up the whole field." She smiled faintly. "You have something in mind?" I did. It started with a list. Every supplier, transporter, and surveyor Carver had dealt with in the last 5 years. Eleanor had contacts in the county records office, and within 2 days we had a map of his business web. Most of it was legal, but not all. There were side contracts with inflated fees, backdated permits, and a holding company in Delaware that traced back to an address in town. A crumbling warehouse I knew well. It was the same warehouse where a developer I'd once worked for had stored records they didn't want the public to see. The plan was simple. If Carver wanted to undermine my reputation, I'd let the truth about his own dealings speak louder than any rumor he could spread. But I couldn't just hand the information to the county. It would look like retaliation. Instead, I called in an old favor, Maria Chen, a journalist who'd covered land disputes for the state ledger. Maria had a nose for corruption and a reputation for getting her facts right. We met at the Willow Cafe in town, the one place where you could talk without worrying about who might be at the next table. I slid the file across to her. "You'll want to verify every line," I said. "But once you do, you'll see the pattern. Carver doesn't just fight for land. He builds scaffolds of debt and paperwork around people until they have no choice but to sell." Maria leafed through the pages, her brows knitting. "You know this could take him down." "That's the idea," I said. Back at the farm, I began another part of the plan day, shoring up my own house. I called the fellowship together and laid it out. Carver tried to use one of us. He failed. But I won't pretend it didn't shake us. From here on, every delivery, every visitor gets logged, no exceptions. There were nods around the room, even from Jenna. Her eyes were tired, but there was a kind of relief in them. The relief of someone who'd been given a chance to climb back from the edge. 3 days later, Maria called. "I'm in," she said. "I've got 3 separate sources confirming the same story. We'll go to print next week. Make it clean," I told her. "No speculation. Just facts." When I hung up, I realized I was smiling for the first time in weeks. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was the sound of the ground shifting under Carver's feet. That evening, I stood on the porch as the last light faded over the ridge. The air smelled of cut hay and the faint sweetness of clover. For the first time, I wasn't just thinking about holding on, I was thinking about pushing forward. If Carver wanted a war, he was about to find out what it felt like when the other side finally started firing back. Sometimes the best defense isn't a wall. It's turning the mirror so your enemy has to face their own reflection. But if you take that step, be ready to stand by it, even when the truth cuts both ways. The article hit the state ledger on a Thursday morning. By noon, Carver's name was trending on local forums. Maria's piece was meticulous. Every permit, every shell company, every whispered deal laid bare in black and white. Eleanor called first. You've rattled the tree, she said. Let's see what falls out. What fell out was faster, uglier, and more calculated than I expected. The next day, a glossy flyer started appearing on bulletin boards and shop counters in town. On the front was a photo of Evan, smiling with his wife and kids, standing on the edge of the farm. Across the top, bold red letters read, "The family. Tamto washo urs." On the back was a letter, supposedly written by Evan, painting me as a manipulative widow who'd used legal loopholes to keep Daniel's legacy from his blood family. It claimed I'd turned the farm into a political weapon and driven away anyone who disagreed with me. By evening, the phone started ringing. Some calls were from friends offering support, others not so friendly. One voice, sharp with anger, said, "You stole from them." I've known Evan since high school. He wouldn't say this unless it was true. I hung up without replying. Eleanor came over that night, tossing a stack of the flyers onto my kitchen table. "He's mixing truth, fiction, and family," she said. "It's the perfect storm." Evan agreed to this, I said. It wasn't a question. Eleanor's silence was answer enough. 2 mornings later, I saw it for myself. Evan standing on the courthouse steps beside Carver, cameras flashing. He was reading from a prepared statement, hitting every line from the flyer. "We're not here to destroy what Margaret's built," he said into the microphones. "We're here to bring it back into the family, where Daniel would have wanted it." The reporters ate it up. That night, Kira came to my office. "Some of the students are asking if it's true," she said quietly. "If you really cut out Daniel's family." I looked at her for a long moment. When Daniel died, the farm was in my name because he wanted it protected from his relatives. He told me exactly what would happen otherwise. She nodded, but I could see the weight of the whispers in her eyes. The real damage wasn't the accusations. It was the doubt. Carver knew how to turn public opinion into a siege, and Evan had given him the perfect battering ram. I stood on the porch after Kira left, staring out at the dark fields. For years, this land had been my refuge, the place where I could breathe. Now it was a stage, and Carver had just sold tickets to the whole county. If he wanted a public fight, I'd give him one. But I'd choose the battlefield. When your enemy can't beat you in private, they'll drag you into the public square. You can't always control what they shout, but you can decide where you stand and how loud you answer. I announced the meeting in the simplest way possible. A handwritten notice pinned to the town hall board and a single post on the farm's website. Community gathering Saturday at 3 p.m. open to all. Questions welcome. Truth required. No accusations, no promises, just an invitation. Eleanor thought it was risky. "You're giving them the mech," she warned. "That's fine," I said. "I'll still hold the room." The day came cold and bright. By noon, people were already drifting toward the barn we'd cleared for the gathering. Neighbors, former fellowship students, curious onlookers, even a few local reporters with cameras dangling from their necks. I wore Daniel's old work jacket. Not for show, but because it still smelled faintly of cedar and smoke, the kind of grounding I needed today. At exactly 3 p.m., I stepped to the front, a long folding table between me and the crowd. On it sat 3 items: the original deed to the farm, Daniel's signed letter from 1992 transferring all rights to me, and a worn leather-bound ledger that had lived in the honey house for decades. "I'm here because there's been a lot said about this land," I began. My voice was steady, but my hands gripped the edge of the table. "Some of it's true. Some of it isn't. All of it matters, because it's about more than a boundary line. It's about trust." I lifted the deed first. This is the record the county keeps. It shows Daniel placed this farm in my name before we were even married, to protect it from a lawsuit his family was facing at the time. A ripple went through the crowd. Someone in the back shifted uneasily. Then I opened the ledger. The smell of old paper drifted out, sharp and earthy. "This is Daniel's handwriting. It records every repair, every harvest, every bill we scraped to pay. He told me once, if they ever try to take this, show them what it cost to keep it." I let the weight of those words settle. People leaned forward, the way they do when the air between sentences gets heavy. That's when I dropped the real turn. "Some of you know Evan's been speaking for Carver's claim," I said. "But here's what you don't know. 2 months ago, Carver offered me a private settlement to transfer the water rights to one of his companies. Evan's name was on the paperwork, as a silent partner. Gasps. A murmur ran through the barn. The reporter's pen scratched faster. I didn't take it, I said, because I promised Daniel I'd protect this land from exactly this kind of deal. And I'll make that same promise to all of you now. This farm will not be sold while I'm alive. The silence after that wasn't hostile. It was tight. Watchful. The kind of pause that means people are recalibrating what they thought they knew. Afterward, as the crowd thinned, Maria found me. You just gave him a problem he can't solve with flyers, she said. But I knew Carver wouldn't slink away. He'd double down, and Evan would have to decide if he was willing to stand in the light with him, or walk away before the shadow swallowed them both. That night, I stood in the barn alone, the ledger still on the table. My hands were shaking now, but it wasn't fear. It was the adrenaline of knowing I'd just taken the fight out of the back rooms and into the open, where everyone could see who flinched first. When lies echo in the dark, drag them into the daylight. The truth may not make you popular, but it will make you impossible to replace. The first sign of Carver's counterattack came less than 48 hours after the gathering. A manila envelope appeared in my mailbox, no return address, just my name typed neatly on a white label. Inside were photocopies of emails, supposedly between me and a surveyor, discussing a backdated water test to avoid legal trouble. The dates lined up perfectly with the years Carver had been hinting about. The signatures looked like mine. The tone almost right, except for one thing: I never used the word expedite in writing. I hate it. Daniel used to tease me about it. By noon, copies of the same emails were being passed around at the hardware store, the diner, even slipped under the windshield wipers of trucks parked at the feed supply. The ledger called. We're getting pressure to retract the story, Maria said. Carver's camp claims you doctored environmental reports. They're feeding this to anyone who'll print it. Can you prove it's fake? I asked. I can try. But they've seeded it everywhere. The smell will stick whether it's true or not. That night, Evan showed up. Not at the farm, but outside the post office, just as I was locking the community bulletin board. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, hair damp like he'd showered in a rush. Is it true? He asked, skipping any greeting. You think I forged tests to keep water rights? I said. I think, he paused. You're capable of doing what you have to, if you believe it's the only way. That's not an answer, I said. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. Carver says if you step aside, the whole mess goes away. He'd give you a payout enough to keep the fellowship running somewhere else. No courts, no press. And you, I ask, do you think I should take it? His eyes shifted away. I think you're burning down bridges that can't be rebuilt. For a moment, the only sound was the metal sign above us creaking in the wind. Evan, I said, this isn't about land. It's about whether you believe Carver's version of me, or the woman Daniel trusted more than anyone. He didn't answer, just stepped back, hands in his jacket pockets, and walked away into the dark. Back at the farm, I sat at the kitchen table with Eleanor, the photocopies spread out between us. She tapped the corner of one page. They're good, she said, but not perfect. See this header line? That email format wasn't used until a year after the date here. We can prove it's fake. It won't matter to the people who want to believe it, I said. Then stop talking to those people, she said. Talk to the ones who still aren't sure. I knew what she meant. Go over Carver's head, straight to the community's trust. But that would mean risking one last, very public confrontation with Evan, and this time it wouldn't be in a barn full of neighbors. It would be face to face, in front of the same cameras Carver had once used to parade him as, the family's voice. A lie dressed in the clothes of truth can still be stripped bare, but only if you know which seams to pull. And sometimes the hardest part isn't proving the lie. It's deciding who's worth proving it to. I didn't call Evan. I sent a single message to the state ledger. Interview request. Myself and Evan Price. Live your cameras, your questions, no conditions. Maria called me back in less than an hour. You sure? If he refuses, then that says everything. I said the interview was set for the following Tuesday at the community hall. No stage, no fancy lighting. Just 2 chairs, a long table, and a camera on each of us. When Evan arrived, Carver came with him, standing off to the side like a handler. He kept his hands clasped behind his back, the faintest smirk playing on his mouth. Evan avoided my eyes as he sat. Maria started soft. Margaret, Evan, thank you for agreeing to this. The community's been hearing two versions of this dispute. Today is a chance to clarify. I kept my gaze on Evan. We both know Daniel's wishes. The only question is whether we honor them or rewrite them to fit someone else's profit. Evan shifted in his seat. Daniel wanted the family taken care of. You've made choices that don't reflect that. A Carver leaned forward in the shadows, clearly enjoying the script. That's when I decided to rip it up. Even, I said, 2 months ago you signed your name to a deal that would have sold the water rights to Carver's shell company. You would have made money. Not the farm, not the family. You. A sharp intake of breath from someone in the audience. Evan froze. Carver's smirk vanished. That document is fake. Carver snapped, stepping forward. Funny, I said, pulling a folder from my bag, because this copy came from the county clerk's office. Stamped. Filed. Signed. I slid it across the table to Maria, who flipped through it, her eyes widening. She turned to Evan. Is this your signature? The pause was long enough to hear the hum of the overhead lights. Evan finally spoke. Voight's mine. Carver stepped closer. We're done here, he muttered, reaching for Evan's arm. But Evan didn't stand. No. We're not. He turned to me, and for the first time in weeks, there was no defensiveness in his expression. Only something like shame. I thought it was just business, he said. I didn't see what he was really doing until now. Maria glanced between us. So what happens next? I took a breath. Next, the farm stays where it belongs, and Carver answers for his deals. Not in whispers, but in court. Carver's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The cameras caught every flicker of his face. That night, back at the farm, I sat on the porch watching the last light fade over the fields. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, Evan wasn't standing on the other side. Sometimes you don't win by shouting louder. You win by putting the truth in a place where silence is no longer an option. 3 days after the interview, the headlines began to fade. Maria's story about the water rights deal had spread fast, and Carver's credibility was bleeding out in the public eye. Evan, though still quiet, had stopped shadowing Carver and even showed up at the farm to help replace a broken fence post. It felt like the storm might finally be moving on. Then the phone rang. The voice on the other end was male, older, with the steady rhythm of someone used to public speaking. Mrs. Price, my name is Alan Mercer. I knew your husband. Daniel and I worked together in Arizona in the late 80s. I waited. I think you should know, he said, that I've been contacted by a man named Carver. He says you're trying to erase certain parts of Daniel's past. He's offering to fly me out to speak at a community forum. The word forum dripped with calculation. That Friday, flyers appeared again, this time in a different color scheme. An old friend speaks. The truth about Daniel Price. Alan's picture was in the corner. A man in his late 60s with a weathered face and eyes that didn't quite smile. The forum was set for the following week at the largest hall in the county. Eleanor brought me one of the flyers. Who is he? I stared at the photo. Daniel mentioned an Alan once. They worked for a land development firm before Daniel came back here. He said Alan was ambitious. The kind of man who never left a deal on the table. You think Carver's paying him? I think Alan doesn't need money, I said slowly. I think he needs an audience. That night, Evan came to the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. I heard about the forum, he said. If Alan says something damaging, people might believe him. Especially after all this. I looked at him. Is there something I don't know? His hesitation was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. Daniel and Alan worked a land swap back then. It was legal but messy. If Alan spins it right, he could make it sound like Daniel cut corners, and that you inherited the habit. The trap was elegant in its cruelty. Carver didn't have to attack me directly anymore. He could just paint Daniel in a certain light, let the shade fall naturally over me. I decided I wouldn't sit back and watch. 3 days before the forum, I called Alan Mercer. This is Margaret Price, I said when he answered. Before you let Carver hand you a script, maybe you'd like to hear mine. There was a pause, then a chuckle. Mrs. Price, I'm looking forward to meeting you. Let's see whose truth holds up. When I hung up, the air in the kitchen felt charged. like the moment before a summer storm breaks. Avon was standing in the doorway watching me. "You're going to that forum?" he asked. "I'm not going to it," I said. "I'm taking it over. Sometimes the past is a weapon, but only if you leave it in someone else's hands. If you take it back, it becomes a shield." The hall was already packed when I arrived. Folding chairs filled every inch of space, and people stood along the walls, murmuring in low, curious tones. Carver was there. Of course, stationed near the front with his arms folded, eyes scanning the crowd like a man counting his winnings before the bet was even called. Alan Mercer stood at the podium. Tall and broad, shouldered despite his age, wearing a crisp tan suit that gave him the look of an old politician. His voice carried easily without the mic. "I'm here," he began, "because I knew Daniel Price before the honey and the lavender fields. Back when we were both in the trenches of land development, the kind of work that shapes towns, for better or worse. I took a seat near the front, my coat still on, hat brim low. Avon sat 2 rows behind me, not quite ready to stand at my side, but close enough to see my face. Alan went on, weaving a story about Daniel that started harmless, a young man with ideas, restless, eager to make his mark, and then began to twist. He was charming, Alan said, but he didn't mind bending the rules. In '89, we secured a land swap that wasn't exactly transparent, and though it made him wealthy, it left a few families without clear water rights for years. Daniel told me, "Sometimes you've got to look the other way if you want to get things done." The room shifted. Some people leaned in, others crossed their arms. Carver's gaze flicked toward me like a spark testing dry grass. I stood. "Mind if I respond?" Alan smiled thinly. "Mrs. Price." "Of course." I stepped to the front, my boots clicking on the worn wood floor. "Alan, you left something out. You were the one who proposed that swap. Daniel was the junior partner, and the only one who went back to those families, years later, to buy their water rights back. Out of his own pocket." A ripple of murmurs. Alan's jaw tightened. "You can't prove that." I pulled a folded document from my bag, yellowed paper, notarized. "This is the agreement. And this," I held up a photograph, "is Daniel standing with the Wilson family in '95, the day they signed the rights back over. I was there." The look on his face wasn't pride and profit. It was relief. For a moment, the hall was quiet except for the hum of the overhead lights. Then I said softer, "Daniel told me that night, I don't want to be the man I almost became. He came home, sold his share of the firm, and never looked back. That's the man I married. That's the man Carver doesn't want you to remember." Alan glanced toward Carver, but Carver didn't return the look. His jaw was locked, his posture stiff, the posture of a man realizing the room had shifted under his feet. I let the silence stretch, then turned to the audience. "You wanted the truth. You just heard it, not from a flyer. Not from a dealmaker, from the record and from the people who were there." When I left the podium, Evan was standing. For the first time, his eyes met mine without hesitation. And in them, I saw it, not just belief, but a choice being made. When the past is used against you, don't deny it, complete it. The truth isn't always spotless, but it's always stronger when it's whole. The morning after the forum, I woke to the sound of the phone ringing off the hook. By the time I reached it, Eleanor was already there, her face pale. "It's the bank," she mouthed. I took the receiver. "Mrs. Price." The voice on the other end was clipped formal. "We're calling regarding a pending lien on your property. Multiple creditors have filed claims against the farm based on outstanding debts tied to your name." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible." The caller hesitated. "We have signed promissory notes, Mrs. Price. Dated over the past 12 months. I never signed anything. They're notarized," he said. The line went quiet except for the faint shuffle of papers. "The largest is from a company called Riverbend Holdings. For $220,000. I didn't need to be told." Riverbend was one of Carver's shells. Within hours, a courier delivered a thick envelope, a formal notice of intent to seize assets if the debts weren't settled within 30 days. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the pages. They forged every signature. The dates are spread out just enough to make it look like you've been in financial trouble for over a year. I rubbed my temples. Even if we prove it's fake, the process could tie the farm up for months, long enough for Carver to make his move. That evening, Evan arrived, a stack of folders under his arm. I went digging, he said. Some of these debts, they're linked to accounts that never existed before last month. Carver's laundering the paper trail through old contacts of mine. I stared at him. You're telling me this now? I didn't know until this morning, he said, voice tight. I think he planned this for after the forum, in case the smear didn't stick. Eleanor leaned back, crossing her arms. So he's trying to drain you legally and financially. If you can't pay or fight in court fast enough, the farm goes to auction. The weight of it pressed in. It wasn't just land. It was Daniel's beehives, the lavender rose, the porch where he'd read in the evenings. It was everything. But I wasn't done fighting. I looked at Evan. If Carver's using your old contacts, we have one advantage. You know how they work. We turn this around, make his own network the rope that hangs him. Evan hesitated, then nodded. There's one man who might talk. But if I go to him, Carver will know I've switched sides for good. Then it's time you decide whose side you were ever on, I said. Outside, the first frost of the season was settling over the fields. The lavender lay dormant, but the roots were still alive beneath the surface. Waiting. Sometimes your enemies stop attacking your name and start attacking your foundation. The only way to survive is to remember. The strongest roots grow in the coldest ground. It was a little past 8 p.m. when Evan left the farm. The frost made the gravel crunch under his boots as he crossed to his truck. He didn't say where he was going, but I knew. The contact was a man named Frank Daly, a fixer who operated in the gray zones between law and crime. He'd been part of the same network Evan once ran with, back when quick deals and quiet favors could buy you almost anything. If Frank talked, Carver's paper empire could unravel overnight. But Frank never talked for free. The meeting place was an abandoned diner off Route 14. Its neon sign flickered in the dark, the word "Eats half dead." Inside, the air was stale with dust and old grease. A single booth near the back was lit by a flickering bowl. Frank sat there, wearing a leather jacket that looked older than me. His eyes were sharp and yellowed at the edges, like a fox that had seen too many winters. Ivan, he said, leaning back. Thought you were done with this life. Ivan slid into the booth. I am. But I need information. Carver's running a fraud campaign against Margaret Price. I think you've seen the accounts. Frank smirked. I've seen more than that. I've seen who's moving the money. Not just Carver, a judge, 2 councilmen, and a bank officer with a taste for high-stakes poker. Evan kept his voice steady. I need proof. Names, transactions, whatever you've got. Frank's smirk faded. That kind of proof doesn't leave my hands unless I know I'll still have hands after. Carver's dangerous, Evan, and he's not working alone. You think I don't know that? Evan said. Frank studied him. You're only sitting here because you're not on his target list yet. But the moment you cross him, you will be. And the thing about Carver, he doesn't just ruin you. He ruins everyone who stands near you. Evan glanced at the envelope on the table between them. Thick, sealed. The weight of it was almost visible. How much? He asked. Frank shook his head. Not money. I want protection. Real protection. A way out when this all blows up. You get me that, and the file's yours. Evan thought for a moment. I can get you safe passage. Margaret's got allies in the state attorney's office. Frank's laugh cut him off. Margaret Price. The beekeeper widow. She's exactly the kind of person who'll be burned to ash before she even knows the fire's started. Evan's jaw tightened. She's tougher than you think. Frank leaned forward, voice dropping. Then she'd better be. Because Carver already knows you're here. A shadow moved near the doorway. The diner's front door creaked open, letting in a draft of cold night air, and 2 men in dark coats stepped inside. Evan's pulse kicked up. The envelope was still on the table. Frank didn't move. You've got one shot, kid. Decide if you're walking out with the file, or if you're walking out at all. Some keys don't just open doors. They open traps. And once you pick them up, there's no putting them back down. The diner felt smaller the moment the 2 men stepped inside. Not just because they were large, both well over 6 feet, but because they carried the kind of silence that comes before violence. Evan's eyes flicked to the door, gauging distance, angles. If he moved too fast, they'd take it as a challenge. Too slow, and they'd box him in. Frank didn't flinch. He just pushed the envelope toward Evan with 2 fingers. There's your future, he said, voice calm. Or your funeral. Evan's heart pounded, but his thoughts were strangely clear. He could walk away now, no file, no proof, and tell Margaret it was a dead end. She'd hate him for it, but she'd be alive. Or he could take the envelope, and Carver would know beyond doubt that Evan had crossed over. That would put a target not just on Evan, but on the farm and on Margaret. The men in coats began to move down the aisle between the booths, slow, steady steps. One of them reached into his jacket. Frank's voice cut the air like a wire snapping. I told you, Carver. The boy's here to talk. If you want to make this ugly, you'll have to kill me first. Avon glanced at Frank. There was something in the older man's eyes, not bravado, but a tired acceptance. Like a man who had spent his life bargaining with devils and finally knew the bill was due. Why are you helping me? Avon asked quietly. Frank didn't look away. Because once, a long time ago, I was the one sitting where you are now, and no one helped me. The weight of that answer landed harder than Evan expected. The taller of the two men stopped beside their booth. Mr. Daly, he said in a deep, flat voice. The boss says you're done talking. Evan could feel the heat of the decision pressing against his ribs. His father's voice, the one he hadn't heard since he was a boy, echoed in his head. A man's worth is measured by what he protects when it's hardest to protect it. His hand closed around the envelope. He didn't look at the men, didn't give them the satisfaction of fear. I'm leaving with this, he said, standing. If you want to stop me, do it now. The two men didn't move immediately. They were calculating. Killing him here would be messy. Too many windows. Too many headlights from passing trucks. Frank slid out of the booth. Walk, he murmured. Evan walked. Every step to the door felt like crossing a wire bridge in the wind, but the men didn't follow. Not yet. Outside, the cold hit him like a slap. He didn't start breathing normally until he was in the truck. Envelope on the passenger seat like a live explosive. But instead of relief, there was something else swelling in his chest. Dread. Because he knew the moment he handed this to Margaret, there was no way back. And Carver would burn the ground to stop them. He gripped the wheel, staring at the empty road ahead. Somewhere in the silence, a thought began to take shape. Maybe the only way to end this is to bring the fire to him first. And in that moment, Avon realized he was done playing defense. The hardest choices aren't between right and wrong. They're between what you can live with and what you can't. Avon arrived back at the farm just before midnight. The frost was thick on the lavender beds, silvering every stem in the moonlight. Margaret was on the porch, wrapped in Daniel's old wool coat, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. When she saw the envelope, she didn't ask how he got it. She only asked, is it everything? Evan sat beside her, the wooden boards creaking. Enough to destroy him. But it's not just him, Margaret. Carver's tied into half the county. Council members, a bank officer, even a judge. If we go after him, they all go down. Margaret stared out at the frozen fields. Then maybe it's time they did. Inside, they spread the contents across the kitchen table. Bank transfers, false land deeds. Internal memos hinting at bribes disguised as consulting fees. Evan tapped one page. This is the key. Carver's been using Riverbend Holdings to funnel money. If we can get this to the state attorney before he knows we have it. Margaret cut in. He'll know the second we make a move. And if he's cornered, he'll lash out. This farm, the hives, even Eleanor. Nothing will be safe. Silence settled, heavy and electric. Eleanor emerged from the hallway, hair down, robe tied tight. Then you'll need a plan that doesn't give him a chance to strike first. She stepped into the kitchen, eyeing the documents. What if you don't just expose him? What if you make him burn himself? Evan frowned. Meaning? You leak just enough to make his partners think he's about to turn on them. People like that don't wait to see if it's true. They cut you loose fast, and in the scramble, he'll make mistakes. Margaret leaned back, thinking. Divide his allies before we hit him with the full case. Evan's mind was already moving. I can plant rumors in the right places. But once we start, there's no stopping it. He'll know we're behind it. Margaret met his gaze. Evan, we're already past the point of no return. In that moment, something shifted between them. The hesitation that had lived in Evan's eyes since he returned was gone. He reached across the table, resting his hand over hers. Then we finish this. They spent the rest of the night mapping it out. Eleanor would act as their inside voice, subtly feeding the story to people who trusted her. Evan would contact Frank one last time to verify details that would make the leaks undeniable. And Margaret would prepare the farm. Not to run, not to hide, but to be ready if the fight came to her doorstep. Just before dawn, Margaret stepped outside. The frost was breaking under the first light, melting into drops that clung to the lavender stems like clear glass beads. It looked almost beautiful and fleeting. She had the sense that this calm was the last they'd have for a long time. Sometimes winning isn't about striking harder. It's about making your enemy swing first and miss. It started small, like a ripple in still water. A casual conversation at the hardware store, a hushed remark at the Rotary Club meeting. By the end of the week, whispers about Carver turning state's witness had reached 3 of his biggest allies. Eleanor was the perfect messenger. Never too obvious, never pushing the story too hard. She'd plant a seed, then walk away, letting paranoia do the rest. Evan worked the other side, feeding just enough real detail to make the rumor undeniable. A date here, a transaction there, a name dropped in the right ear. Every piece came from the envelope Frank had risked his neck to hand over. By Thursday, Carver's phone was ringing off the hook, not with support, but with suspicion. 2 of his investors froze their accounts. A third canceled a land deal. Margaret watched it unfold like a storm gathering on the horizon. She knew what came next, and she was right. Friday morning, just after dawn, the farm's gate clanged open. A black SUV rolled up the drive, tires crunching over the gravel. Margaret stepped onto the porch, mug in hand, heart steady. Carver got out. No entourage this time, no smirk. His eyes were flat, hard. "You think you're clever," he said, walking toward her. "But clever runs out. And when it does, people start paying for your games." Margaret didn't answer. She let him close the distance, watching the muscle in his jaw twitch. "You want to know what happens when you corner me?" he continued. I bite back. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, tossing it onto the porch. It landed at her feet, a foreclosure notice. "This farm," he said, "will be gone in 30 days. The bank's already processing it." Even stepped out from the doorway behind her. "You forged those debts. We can prove it." Carver's eyes slid to him. "Then prove it. In court. While you're doing that, I'll make sure you've got nowhere to sleep." He turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and Margaret, tell your friend Eleanor to stop spreading bedtime stories. She's not as invisible as she thinks." The SUV door slammed, and the vehicle rolled away, leaving nothing but the crunch of gravel and the sharp smell of exhaust. Eleanor emerged from the side path, face pale. "He knows." Margaret picked up the foreclosure notice, smoothing the creases with her thumb. Her voice was calm, but her chest burned. "Then it means we're getting close enough to hurt him." Even looked at her, jaw set. "It also means we've only got weeks before he makes good on this." Margaret met his eyes. "Then we don't wait weeks." That night, they cleared the kitchen table again. The documents, the timelines, the list of Carver's associates, all spread out under the warm yellow light. This was no longer about defense, no longer about rumor. It was time for the killing blow. When the storm finally comes to your door, it's not the noise that matters. It's whether you've built your house to stand. Evan's plan was simple on paper: release the full set of documents to the state attorney's office, the press, and a trusted contact in the Department of Justice, all at the same time. No single leak Carver could plug. No chance for him to bury the evidence before it spread. Margaret's job was to deliver the package in person to the attorney's office, while Evan stayed behind to coordinate the digital drop. Eleanor would feed a final, damning whisper into Carver's circle, ensuring his allies scattered before the blow landed. It was tight, risky, and left no margin for hesitation. The morning before they moved, Evan received a text from an unknown number: "Meet me, South Bridge, noon, bring no one." Attached was a single image, a photocopy of an arrest record, his arrest record from 15 years ago, the charge aggravated assault. Evan froze. Only 2 people had ever seen that file. One was him. The other was Carver. When he arrived at the South Bridge, the wind off the water cut through his jacket. Carver was leaning against the railing, gloved hands in his pockets, looking like a man out for a casual smoke. "You've been busy," Carver said without turning around. Almost clever enough to win. Evan didn't answer. His eyes were on the folder Carver held loosely in one hand. "This," Carver said, tapping the folders, "the real you. The one Margaret hasn't met. The one who put a man in the hospital for 6 months. That charge was dropped," Even said flatly. Carver smiled thinly. "Drop doesn't mean forgotten. Imagine what happens when the press gets this. When your nice little farm widow learns she's been working with a thug." Even's gut twisted. He had spent years burying that part of himself, convincing himself it was over, that he was different now. But Carver's words lit up the old shame like a flare. "What do you want?" Evan asked. Carver stepped closer. "I want you to burn those documents. Walk away, and if you do, this stays buried. If you don't..." He let the silence finish the sentence. Avon drove back to the farm with the wind screaming through the half-open window, trying to drown out the war in his head. When he pulled up, Margaret was on the porch, her eyes searching his face. What happened? Avon hesitated. He could tell her the truth, risk her trust right before the fight, or keep it hidden and pray Carver's threat was just another bluff. But he knew something Carver didn't. Margaret had her own past, one she'd never run from, and maybe she'd understand. He handed her the folder. "Before we move forward, you need to know who I was." Margaret took it, scanning the first page. When she looked up, there was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet weight. "Evan, I don't care where you've been. I care where you stand now. And right now, you're standing with me." The tension in his chest broke. Not gone, but lighter. Margaret set the folder down. "Then let's finish this before he tries again." The next morning, the final move began. Emails queued, packages sealed, contacts primed. But somewhere in the city, Carver was already making his own last play, and neither of them saw the second trap he'd set. The past is a weight only if you keep carrying it for your enemies. Put it down, and it becomes armor. It was supposed to be a clean morning. Margaret was halfway to the state attorney's office, with the evidence sealed in a brown courier envelope. Avon sat at the farmhouse desk, fingers flying over the keyboard, scheduling the simultaneous digital drop. Eleanor was in town, quietly planting the last whisper into the right ear. Everything was on track, until Evan's screen froze. At first, he thought it was just the old laptop acting up. But then every file in the folder began disappearing. One by one, like someone was erasing them in real time. He yanked the Wi-Fi connection, but it was too late. The files were gone. All that remained was a single new document on the desktop, labeled in bold caps TKOSK. Evan opened it. Inside was one sentence: "Check your bees." The blood drained from his face. He bolted out the door, sprinting across the frosted grass toward the hives. From a distance, they looked fine. Still rows of white boxes, sunlight glinting off the lids. But as he got closer, the low hum was wrong, too faint. He pried one lid open. The air was heavy with the smell of chemicals. Inside, hundreds of bees lay still, wings twitching weakly. A clear sign of pesticide poisoning. Margaret's voice crackled over his phone before he could call her. "Evan, the envelope's gone." "What?" "I stopped for gas. I swear it was locked in the car. When I came back, it was just gone. No one saw anything." Even closed his eyes. 2 strikes at once. The data and the physical files. Carver had been inside their plan the whole time. He called Eleanor. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. A cold thought slid into his mind. What if she's the leak? But another thought followed, darker. Or what if she's in trouble right now? Margaret was still on the line. "We can't recover the originals, but Frank might have copies. He said he kept insurance." Evan's mind raced. "Then we find him. Now." Margaret's voice hardened. "If Carver knew to hit both of us today, he knows about Frank, too." They both understood the unspoken truth. If they didn't get to Frank first, there'd be nothing left to fight with. Evan slammed the truck into gear. Gravel spat from the tires as he tore down the drive. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a single, bitter thought took root: Carver's not defending anymore. He's hunting. When your enemy stops reacting and starts dictating the terms, you're not in a fight. You're in a race. Frank lived on the far side of Pine Hollow, past the abandoned mill and the 2-lane bridge that always seemed one crack away from collapse. Margaret knew the route by heart, but her hands still tightened on the wheel as the truck roared through the hairpin turns. Avon kept scanning the rearview. No cars behind them, but the paranoia clung like fog. "He knows where Frank is," he muttered. "We're not the only ones heading there." They reached the bridge just as a white van appeared from the other side, slowing as it approached. The windows were tinted, the license plate mud-caked. Margaret's instinct screamed. She pulled hard to the shoulder, letting the van pass first. Through the windshield, she caught a glimpse. 2 men in black ball caps, no expressions, eyes locked forward. When the van was gone, she punched the gas. We're out of time. Frank's cabin was tucked into a grove of bare oaks, smoke curling from the chimney. But something was wrong. The front door stood ajar, swaying gently. Evan jumped out before the truck had fully stopped. "Frank!" he shouted, rushing inside. The place was a mess. Papers scattered, drawers yanked out, coffee table overturned. In the middle of the chaos, Frank sat slumped in his armchair, alive but pale, a bruise swelling on his temple. Margaret knelt beside him. "Frank, talk to me. Where's the backup?" His eyes fluttered open. "Safo under the floorboards kitchen." He coughed, then gripped Evan's wrist with surprising strength. "But it's not just the files. There's something else in there. Something Carver doesn't know I have." Evan leaned in. "What is it?" Frank's voice dropped to a rasp. "It's the ledger. From the first job. The one before all this." Margaret's brow furrowed. "What first job?" Frank's gaze flicked between them. "Evan knows." The words landed like a stone in the room. Evan froze, a muscle jumping in his jaw. Margaret turned to him. "Evan, what is he talking about?" Evan exhaled slowly. "Before Carver became who he is now, there was a job, a heist. Not money, land rights. We forged signatures, bribed a surveyor. I was young, stupid, thought I was just helping move paperwork. But that land, it's the one Carver built everything on. The ledger proves the whole foundation of his empire is stolen." Frank nodded weakly. "And if it comes out, it won't just bring him down. It'll wipe every deal he's ever made off the map." From outside came the crunch of tires on gravel. Margaret's head snapped toward the window. A black SUV had pulled into the clearing. 2 men stepped out, the same ones from the van. Evan moved fast, flipping up the kitchen rug and prying loose the floorboard. Inside was a metal box, heavy and cold. He shoved it into Margaret's hands. "Go." Through the back, Frank grabbed Evan's sleeve. "Don't let them get it." "Won't." Margaret was already halfway to the back door when the first fist slammed against the front. The race wasn't over. It was just entering its final lap. The first kick against the front door splintered the frame. Margaret didn't wait for the second. She darted through the kitchen, the metal box heavy in her arms, its cold edges digging into her ribs with every step. Behind her, Evan dragged the overturned coffee table toward the entryway, wedging it as a crude barricade. "Go," he shouted without looking back. Margaret slipped out the back, boots crunching over frost-crusted leaves, the cold air biting her face. She didn't dare head for the truck. It was too exposed. Instead, she cut toward the narrow deer trail that wound through the oaks. Her breath came in sharp bursts, the box's weight throwing off her balance, but she kept moving. From inside the cabin, she heard the crash of wood breaking and a man's voice. "Where is it?" Another voice, lower, colder. "He doesn't have it." "She does." Evan stood his ground in the front room. 2 men burst in, black ball caps pulled low. The first lunged, but Evan caught him with a shoulder to the chest, driving him into the wall. The second swung a crowbar. It missed Evan's head by inches, gouging the doorframe instead. "You're making this harder than it has to be," the first man growled. "Good." Evan shot back, his voice steady even as adrenaline roared in his veins. "I'm trying to." Out in the woods, Margaret's legs burned. She risked a glance over her shoulder. One of the men had broken off from the cabin and was now following her trail. She pushed harder, the metal box banging against her hip, her mind racing through the map of the land. The creek was close. If she could make it there, she could use the waterline to hide her tracks. The snap of a branch behind her told her she didn't have long. Back at the cabin, Evan's barricade finally gave way. 1 man pinned him while the other ransacked the room. But then a third figure appeared in the doorway. A man in a dark overcoat, tall, deliberate in every movement. Carver. He stepped inside, surveying the scene like a man inspecting a painting. "Where's the box, Evan?" Evan didn't answer. Carver smiled faintly. "You know what's inside. And you know it's the end for all of us if it leaves this county." In the woods, Margaret reached the creek and slid down the bank, boots skidding in the mud. The water was icy, soaking through her jeans instantly. She waded in, biting back a gasp, then moved downstream, letting the current mask her trail. She didn't hear the footsteps anymore. For a moment, the only sounds were the rush of water and her own breathing. Then, a new sound, the low hum of an engine. Margaret looked up to see the outline of another vehicle parked near the old logging road. The driver stepped out slowly. It was Eleanor. Margaret froze, heart hammering. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor's eyes flicked to the metal box. "Getting you out before it's too late. Get in." Margaret hesitated. Something in Eleanor's voice was different, too calm, too certain. But the roar of an ATV engine in the distance told her she didn't have time to question. She climbed in, still clutching the box. As the car door shut, Eleanor glanced at her with a small, unreadable smile. "You're going to want to hear what I have to tell you before you open that thing." In the heat of the chase, the person who offers you a way out might be saving you, or delivering you straight into the fire. The tires crunched over the frozen dirt as Eleanor's SUV wound through the back roads. Margaret kept the metal box in her lap, fingers pressed to the cool steel. Her body tense like she was holding a live bomb. Eleanor's hands were steady on the wheel. "You think I stumbled into this mess because I like your company," she said without looking at Margaret. Margaret narrowed her eyes. "If this is your idea of small talk, you're terrible at it." A faint smile. "I knew about the ledger before you did. Before Frank ever hinted at it." Margaret's stomach tightened. "How?" "Because my father was the surveyor Carver bribed," Eleanor said. "He thought he was doing a quick job for extra cash. Months later, he realized he'd handed over the land that became the foundation of Carver's empire. He kept quiet until the guilt killed him." Margaret studied Eleanor's profile. "So you've been trying to take Carver down?" Eleanor finally glanced at her. "Trying to decide how. That ledger doesn't just destroy Carver. It drags everyone who touched that deal into the light, including your friend Evan." Margaret's grip on the box tightened. Evan was a kid. He didn't know. "Intent doesn't erase the paper trail," Eleanor cut in. "When this blows up, they won't care about his excuses. And Carver knows it. That's why he's been pushing him to burn the evidence." Margaret's pulse pounded. "You brought me here to tell me not to use it." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "I brought you here to give you a choice before Carver forces one on you." At the cabin, Evan faced Carver across the wreckage of Frank's living room. "You've been busy," Carver said, picking up a photo frame from the floor and setting it upright on the mantel, "gathering scraps, digging up graves." Evan kept his stance wide, ready. "Scraps are enough if they show the whole picture." Carver's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You think you can end me with that ledger? That's not your weapon. That's a grenade with both our names carved into it." One of Carver's men stepped forward, but Carver lifted a hand. "You're not my enemy, Evan. You're my proof. The boy who helped me steal the ground under everyone's feet. You think they'll let you walk after they see your signature in that book?" Evan felt the old guilt gnawing at him, but he didn't let it show. "Maybe not. But I'd rather go down holding the truth than live under your shadow." Carver tilted his head, studying him. "Well, see if you still believe that when the fire's at your feet." Back in the SUV, Margaret's phone buzzed. "A single text from Evan. They have me. Get to Frank's safe house. Don't open the box until we talk." Eleanor glanced at the screen, then back at the road. "Looks like we're running out of time." Margaret looked out the window, the trees blurring past, and realized with a cold twist in her gut. She still didn't know which side Eleanor was really on. The closer someone gets to your enemy, the more you have to wonder whose game they're really playing. Yours or theirs. The safe house was an old ranger station on the edge of Hollow Creek, the kind of place hunters used in the off-season. When Eleanor's SUV rolled into the clearing, the building sat quiet under a thin coat of snow. Margaret stepped out first, scanning the tree line. Her grip on the metal box hadn't loosened since they left Frank's. Inside, the station was dim, the air smelling faintly of cedar and dust. Margaret's eyes adjusted, and then froze. Sitting at the wooden table, hands folded neatly, was Frank's niece, Lydia. Margaret hadn't seen her in years. Not since she'd left town after a messy divorce. She looked older now, hair streaked with silver, but her gaze was steady. "You shouldn't have brought that here," Lydia said, nodding at the box. Margaret frowned. Frank trusted you. Lydia's lips curved faintly. Frank didn't tell you everything. That ledger, it's not just Carver's sin. My father's in it too. And I have no intention of letting his name be dragged through the mud. Eleanor closed the door behind them. Lydia's the one who tipped me off about the ledger's location. She's been keeping her own copy. Margaret's eyes widened. You've had it this whole time. Lydia nodded once. And I've been deciding what to do with it. But now that you've stirred Carver's nest, we're out of options. He'll burn the whole county down to get it back. Margaret stepped closer. Then we use it before he can. Lydia's gaze hardened. You think I'm here to help you expose him? No, I'm here to make sure this never sees daylight. At the cabin, Carver circled Evan slowly, like a wolf testing the perimeter of a trap. You have two choices, Carver said, voice low but clear. You bring me that box, and you walk away with your freedom. No one touches you, no one drags your name through the dirt, or... Evan kept his eyes locked on Carver. Or I keep it, and you try to kill me. Carver smiled thinly. Not try, Evan. Succeed. One of the men tossed a phone onto the table in front of Evan. The screen lit up with a live video feed, Margaret, inside the ranger station, the metal box still in her arms. Carver leaned in, his shadow falling across Evan. That's right, I know where she is. And I can get there faster than you think. Evan's heart pounded, but he kept his voice even. You're bluffing. Carver straightened. Call it a bluff then. But every second you hesitate, she runs out of them. Back at the safe house, Lydia set her copy of the ledger on the table, placing it deliberately between herself and Margaret. Two ledgers, one truth. Whoever controls them controls the endgame. Margaret's pulse quickened. And what's your endgame? Before Lydia could answer, a sound cut through the stillness. The crunch of tires on snow, getting closer. Eleanor moved to the window. Her expression didn't change, but her voice dropped. We're out of time. When too many people hold the same truth, it stops being a weapon and becomes a fuse. The rumble of engines outside grew louder, echoing off the frozen trees. Margaret's grip on the metal box tightened until her knuckles whitened. Eleanor didn't move from the window. Two vehicles, she murmured. SUVs, no headlights. Lydia rose from her chair, slipping her ledger into the inside pocket of her coat. They're here for both copies. Margaret's chest tightened. Then we leave now. Eleanor shook her head. Too late. They've surrounded the clearing. The front door swung open before anyone could react. Carver stepped in first, flanked by two men with silenced pistols at their sides. His coat was dusted with snow, but his expression was untouched by the cold. Cozy, Carver said, glancing around the cabin. His eyes landed on Margaret. You have something of mine. Margaret stood her ground. Not yours. Never was. Eleanor turned slightly toward Carver, her face unreadable. You came faster than I thought. Carver's lips curved. You always did underestimate me. Something about the way they spoke, as if they'd rehearsed it, made Margaret's stomach sink. She looked between them. You've worked together before. Eleanor didn't deny it. I've worked for both sides. That's how you survive. Lydia stepped forward, voice sharp. You're not getting either ledger. If these go public, you're finished. Carver's gaze moved to her, softer somehow. And if they don't go public? Your father's name stays clean. You keep your quiet life. Margaret felt the air shift. Lydia's stance faltered, the ledger in her coat suddenly heavy. Then, in a movement so fast Margaret almost missed it, Eleanor drew a pistol from inside her jacket and leveled it at Margaret's chest. Put the box on the table, Eleanor said, voice low but steady. Margaret stared at her, heat rising in her ears. You're not handing it to him. Eleanor's jaw tightened. I'm handing it to the one who can make sure no one we care about gets buried because of it. Carver smiled faintly, as if everything was falling into place. Smart woman. But before he could step closer, the rear door banged open. Evan stood there, snow clinging to his coat, a revolver in his hand and a cut along his cheek. His eyes locked on Margaret. Drop it, Eleanor. Eleanor's gaze flicked to him, and for the first time, Margaret saw hesitation. Carver took a single step forward. Ivan, be reasonable. We both know what's in those ledgers. You burn them, you walk away clean. She burns them, and you're finished. Evan's voice didn't waver. Maybe I'm done running. The room went still, every breath visible in the cold air. Lydia's hand moved slowly toward her coat pocket. Margaret's mind raced, 2 ledgers, 4 armed people, 1 way out. And she realized, in a flash of clarity, that whatever happened in the next 30 seconds would decide not just who survived, but whose truth the world would remember. In the final standoff, survival isn't just about who's holding the weapon. It's about who's ready to use the truth like one. The air in the ranger station felt heavier, as if the cold itself was waiting to see who would pull the trigger first. Margaret's eyes darted between Eleanor's pistol, Carver's men at his sides, and Evan's revolver aimed squarely at Eleanor. Lydia's hand hovered over her coat pocket, where her own ledger was hidden. "Put the box down," Eleanor repeated, her voice tightening. Margaret's jaw locked. "If you want it, you're going to have to." The first shot split the air. It wasn't Margaret. Evan fired, the bullet slamming into the wall inches from Eleanor's head. She flinched, but didn't drop her weapon. Instead, she turned it toward Evan, finger curling on the trigger. Carver's men reacted instantly. One lunged for Margaret, the other for Lydia. Margaret swung the metal box upward with both hands, catching her attacker in the jaw. He stumbled back, giving her just enough space to grab the pistol from his holster. Across the room, Lydia had pulled her own gun from her coat, but she wasn't aiming at Carver. She was aiming at Margaret. "Sorry, Mags," Lydia said softly. "Family first." Carver's attention snapped to her, his voice sharp. "Don't you dare." But before he could finish, a deafening crack echoed. Lydia had fired. Not at Margaret, but at the second man near Carver. He dropped instantly, blood dark against the floorboards. Margaret's heart lurched. Lydia tossed her the ledger from her coat. "Run." Evan moved first, shoving a chair into Carver's path. "Go, Margaret." Eleanor fired again, the shot grazing Evan's arm as he ducked. Margaret bolted toward the back door, both ledgers and the metal box clutched tight. The cold hit her like a wall, but she kept running, her boots digging into the snow. Behind her, chaos erupted. Shouting, another gunshot, wood splintering. She didn't stop until she reached the tree line, lungs burning, the weight of the ledgers dragging at her arms. Somewhere behind her, a voice carried faintly through the trees. "Margaret! Keep running!" It was Evan's voice. And then, silence. Margaret didn't look back. She couldn't. Every step forward was another second between her and Carver, between her and whoever had survived that room. The ledgers pressed cold against her chest. For the first time, she realized. She now held all the truth, and she was alone with it. Sometimes survival means running with the truth, before anyone can decide you're not worthy of keeping it. Margaret didn't stop until her legs gave out. The cabin was miles behind her now, just a smear of smoke and shadow in the valley. She stumbled into a derelict hunting shack she remembered from years ago, its roof sagging, one shutter barely hanging on. Inside, the air was stale and cold. She dragged a crate to the center of the room, set the ledgers and the metal box on top, and lit the single oil lamp she found under the counter. Its light bled weakly into the corners, leaving more darkness than it dispelled. For a long moment, she just stared at the 2 ledgers. They were almost identical in weight and size, but the locks were different. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened Lydia's copy first. Neat handwriting, meticulous entries, dates, transactions, names. She recognized some local contractors, the county surveyor, even a bank officer she'd known since childhood. Then she saw it, a name that didn't belong there. Her breath caught in her throat. Daniel Woodacre, her late husband's name. She traced the letters with her fingertip as if the ink might vanish. The entry was dated 3 months before his sudden accident. The car crash everyone said was due to bad weather. The payment beside his name was large. Too large for anything Daniel could have been legitimately involved in. The notation consultation, land division approval. Margaret felt the floor tilt beneath her. Daniel had been part of it. Her chest tightened as she pulled the second ledger toward her. Carver's original. The same date, the same payment. But the notation was different. Secured signature for boundary shift. It wasn't consultation. It was authorization. Daniel's signature had given Carver the legal foothold to take the land. Margaret sank onto the crate, the cold biting through her coat. She had built her grief around the belief that Daniel was an innocent victim. Now she didn't know who she'd been mourning. Outside, snow began to fall heavier, muting the world. She could almost imagine the silence pressing against the walls, holding her there. The oil lamp sputtered. In the dim light, she saw something else, a folded sheet tucked into the back cover of Carver's ledger. She slid it free, her pulse loud in her ears. It was a letter handwritten in Daniel's script. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. I didn't know what I was signing at first. By the time I understood, it was too late. Carver had leverage. I did it to keep you safe. I thought I could fix it, but they moved faster, I'm sorry. It was unsigned, unfinished. The ink blurred in one corner, as if the pen had been jerked away. Margaret sat frozen, the letter trembling in her hands. She didn't know whether to hate him or mourn him all over again. The truth had shifted again. Daniel wasn't innocent, but maybe he wasn't the villain either. Which meant Carver's grip on this town had started with the man she loved. And now she was the only one alive holding proof of it. Margaret folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her coat. Snow battered the warped windows harder now, as if urging her to move. She knew she couldn't stay here long. When she left, it would be to end this, one way or another. The truth can break your heart twice. First when you lose someone, and again when you learn who they really were. Margaret sat in the shack until her fingers ached from the cold, turning Daniel's letter over and over in her hands. Every line cut a little deeper, not just because of what it revealed, but because of what it left unsaid. He had tried to protect her, but he had also built the foundation for everything Carver had done since. If she exposed the ledgers as they were, Daniel's name would be right there in black ink for the world to see. No one would care about the letter in the back, the nuance, the leverage Carver had over him. History didn't have space for complicated truths. She set the letter down and leaned over the ledgers. 2 books, both damning. One path. Turn them over to the state investigators she'd contacted through Frank's old channels. Burn Carver's empire to the ground, but take Daniel's memory with it. The other path, redact Daniel's name, maybe even a few others, before handing them over. Protect the innocent, and the not so innocent, but leave the record incomplete. Her stomach twisted. Every option felt like betrayal. Snow rattled the window frames again. And through the crack in the shutters, she saw a pair of headlights sweeping slowly over the tree line. They were moving deliberately, not like someone passing by. She closed the ledgers fast, shoved them into her pack, and doused the lamp. The shack dropped into darkness. The headlights disappeared. But Margaret knew it was only a matter of time before they found her. Carver wasn't the kind of man to leave a loose end, not with both ledgers in play. She slipped out the back, boots crunching softly in the snow, and started down the old logging trail that wound toward the highway. Her mind ran faster than her feet. She needed a public place, somewhere Carver couldn't control, somewhere she could force the truth into the open on her terms. Then she remembered the county courthouse in Hollow Creek. And more importantly, the press conference scheduled there tomorrow morning for an unrelated zoning case. It would be crawling with reporters, cameras, live feeds. If she made it there with the ledgers, she wouldn't need to trust anyone else to tell the story. But telling it would mean making her choice about Daniel in front of the entire county, maybe the entire state. If she protected him, she risked giving Carver a crack to crawl back through. If she didn't, she would be the one putting the final nail in her husband's coffin. The trail dipped lower, and she could hear the faint hum of the highway through the snow-laden air. She gripped the straps of her pack tighter. In the distance, another sound rose, the low growl of an engine following the trail. Margaret's pulse spiked. She pushed herself faster, slipping on the icy slope but not slowing. Somewhere behind her, a voice carried deep and taunting. "Margaret, you don't want to do this alone!" Carver. She didn't look back. She could see the faint glow of the highway lights now, and in that moment, she made her decision. Daniel had signed his name. That signature had changed everything. For her. For the town, for the families who'd lost their land. The truth wasn't hers to protect. It belonged to everyone who'd been forced into silence. She would tell it all. Every name. Every number. And if it destroyed the man she'd loved, then maybe it would set the rest of them free. Sometimes love means protecting someone's memory. But justice means protecting everyone else from their mistakes. By the time Margaret reached Hollow Creek, the snow had slowed to a drifting curtain of white, making the courthouse steps look like the opening scene of a film no one could script twice. She stood across the street for a moment, catching her breath, watching the crush of reporters and cameramen crowding the entrance. The zoning board conference was still an hour away, but the press had already claimed every inch of space near the doors. Perfect. She adjusted the straps on her pack, feeling the cold edges of the ledgers through the canvas. The courthouse steps weren't just stone. They were a stage. She stepped off the curb. A black SUV slid to a stop at the corner, blocking her path. The rear door opened, and Carver stepped out in a dark overcoat, his breath visible in the winter air. He smiled, not the mocking grin she'd seen in the cabin, but something sharper, hungrier. "You're making a mistake, Margaret." She kept walking. "So stop me." He fell into step beside her, speaking low enough that only she could hear. "You dump those ledgers in front of a camera. You won't just burn me. You'll burn Daniel. His name's in there, and once it's out, you can't take it back." Margaret's boots crunched on the snow. He made his choice. "Now I'm making mine." Carver's tone dropped to a hiss. "You think the press will care about leverage, coercion, or intent? No. They'll headline it as Daniel Whittaker. Corrupt official signs away land rights. That's your legacy, too." They reached the bottom step. Reporters were already turning, cameras swiveling toward them like hunting dogs catching a scent. One shouted, "Ms. Whittaker!" "Is it true you have evidence on the Hollow Creek land scandal?" The crowd surged closer. Carver stepped forward, blocking her from the first camera lens. "Margaret's here under a lot of stress," he said smoothly, as if he were her lawyer. "She's confused about." Margaret shoved past him, pulling the ledgers from her pack. "I'm not confused." Gas rippled through the crowd as she held both books high. "These ledgers contain every illegal land transfer Carver and his associates have made for the past 15 years. Every name, every date, every payment." Carver's voice cut in. "Including your husband's." Margaret didn't flinch. "Yes." "Including my husband's." The words left her mouth heavier than she'd expected, but she didn't let them falter. A dozen camera shutters snapped in rapid bursts. Microphones pushed toward her, the heat from the press lights cutting through the winter air. Margaret opened the first ledger and flipped to Daniel's page. "He signed this under duress, thinking he was protecting me." But the signature still gave Carver what he needed. "That truth belongs to all of us, not just to me." Carver's jaw tightened, his composure cracking for the first time. Security officers moved in now, sensing the tension between them. Carver turned toward the cameras, trying to recover his charm. "This is a desperate stunt by a grieving widow. These documents could be forgeries." Margaret's voice sliced through him. "Then have them examined. Under oath. On record. Today." A murmur swept through the reporters. The kind that meant the story had just shifted from rumor to headline. One cameraman caught Carver's face, just as his smile collapsed completely. Margaret saw it, and for the first time in months, felt the weight on her chest ease. She stepped past him toward the courthouse doors, ledgers in hand, knowing there was no turning back now. The most dangerous truth is the one spoken when the world is already listening. The courthouse lobby smelled faintly of coffee and wet wool as Margaret crossed the marble floor. She'd expected the reporters to be kept outside, but the zoning board hearing room was already being rearranged. Extra chairs, microphones, cables snaking across the carpet. The clerk at the front desk glanced up. "Ms. Whittaker, the district judge wants to see you." Now. 10 minutes later, Margaret found herself at a long oak table in a side chamber. Across from her sat Judge Ellen Hart, gray hair pulled tight, glasses resting low on her nose. On the opposite side of the room, Carver occupied another table, flanked by his attorney. Reporters filled the benches along the wall, cameras rolling. Judge Hart's voice carried no warmth. "Given the public nature of these accusations and the evidence presented, I am invoking emergency procedural review. Both parties will respond on the record." Carver's lawyer shot up first. "Your Honor, this is irregular." Hart cut him off. "So is an elected official accused of orchestrating a 15-year land fraud." "Ms. Whittaker, proceed." Margaret slid both ledgers forward. "These are the original transaction logs. Cross-checked against county records, they show illegal transfers of protected land." Carver was the central coordinator. Carver leaned toward the mic, alleged. "And conveniently, she leaves out the part where her own husband." Margaret didn't flinch. "I'm not leaving it out. Daniel Whittaker signed one of these transfers. That's in the record too." A ripple of surprise went through the room. Judge Hart adjusted her glasses. And you still bring these forward? Yes, Margaret said quietly, because the truth isn't about protecting my grief. It's about protecting everyone who came after. Carver's attorney rose again. If her husband's involved, isn't she benefiting from this fraud as well? Margaret met his gaze. If I am, then I expect the law to treat me the same as it treats him. The judge nodded slowly, then turned to Carver. Mr. Carver, do you deny these are your ledgers? Carver hesitated, just long enough for the cameras to catch it. I deny any wrongdoing. Those could have been altered. Margaret reached into her coat and pulled out Daniel's letter. Then explain why this was hidden in the back of your ledger. She handed it to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. Judge Hart read it silently, then looked up, eyes colder. Mr. Carver, this will be submitted into evidence. And until it's verified, you are barred from any land-related transactions effective immediately. It wasn't an arrest. Not yet. But it was the first crack in the wall. Margaret felt the room shift, reporters scribbling, cameras zooming. Carver's jaw clenched so hard she could see the muscle twitch. The judge called a recess, clearing the room. As people filed out, Carver stopped beside Margaret. His voice was low, dangerous. You think you've won. This isn't over. Margaret looked him dead in the eye. No, it isn't. But for the first time in 15 years, it's not on your terms. Outside, the snow had started again, swirling in slow, lazy arcs. Margaret stood at the top of the courthouse steps, the ledgers heavy in her hands. She had a choice now. Push harder, use every name in those books to crush Carver completely, or close them for good, and let the law take its slow course, preserving what little peace she had left. She didn't decide right away. Some truths didn't need answers yet. Justice isn't always about the verdict. Sometimes it's about making sure the fight happens where everyone can see it. 3 months later, Hollow Creek felt quieter, but not calmer. Carver was no longer at the courthouse. His face had vanished from campaign posters and public boards, replaced by an empty space no one rushed to fill. Margaret walked past the community notice board every Thursday on her way to the farmer's market. People nodded to her now, some grateful, some still wary, a few avoiding her eyes entirely. She had learned that truth didn't guarantee applause. The ledgers had gone into the hands of the state investigators. Every name was reviewed, every signature questioned. Some cases were clear-cut, leading to resignations and indictments. Others were tangled, buried in so much gray that no verdict could untangle them cleanly. One morning, she received a plain envelope in her mailbox. Inside, a photocopy of a page from the ledger. The name circled in red was not Carver's, not Daniel's. It was someone still in office, someone who hadn't been touched. Margaret held the paper for a long time, standing at her kitchen window as the late winter sun stretched across the yard. She could go back into the fight. She could call the same reporters, stand on the same courthouse steps, throw herself back into the storm. Or she could let this one rest, trusting that sooner or later, someone else would pick it up. Her reflection in the glass looked older, but not weaker. Maybe there was no such thing as finished. Only the choice to keep walking forward, even when the past still reached for your heels. That afternoon, she visited Daniel's grave for the first time since the hearing. She placed the letter he'd written, the original, under a flat stone at the edge of his marker. No words this time. Just a silent agreement between the living and the dead. As she left the cemetery, the spring wind carried voices from town, laughter mixed with the sound of hammering. Someone repairing a shopfront, someone planting early flowers. Life didn't pause for justice. It moved around it, over it, through it. And so would she. The truth is never a single moment. It's a series of choices, to speak, to stand, to keep going even when the fight isn't finished. If this story stayed with you, it's because you know that silence can protect the wrong people. So tell your stories. Ask the hard questions. Don't wait for the perfect moment. It doesn't exist. And if you've ever had to choose between protecting someone's memory and protecting the truth, I'd love to hear what you decided. Share it in the comments. Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear today.